Hey there, tonight we're diving into what weaving was like in ancient Egypt, where the reality is that every thread was more valuable than today's gold and linen was the true power behind the pharaoh's throne. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're jolted awake by the squawking of a goose that seems to believe it's the pharaoh of the Nile. Welcome to your morning in ancient Egypt, where you're not just living history, you're weaving it, quite literally. Around you, the village is already bustling like a scene from the world's earliest sitcom. People are up and about, their routines as predictable as the flooding of the Nile. And you're headed to the heart of it all, the weaving workshop. First things first, let's talk about your wardrobe, or lack thereof. In this sun-drenched land of pyramids and papyrus, clothing is not just a fashion statement, but a necessity. Enter the world of textiles, where flax is king. Forget cotton, that's for future civilizations to obsess over. Your primary material is flax, the plant that gives us linen, one of the oldest textiles known to humanity. It's not just your favorite tunic material, but also the currency of ancient Egypt. Yes, you heard that right. In a society where coinage is yet to make its grand entrance, textiles are as good as gold. Now, flax doesn't just magically turn into linen. It requires a process as tedious as untangling last year's Christmas lights. After harvesting, the flax plant is redded, a fancy word for letting it rot in water until the fibers are ready to be spun. The fibers are then combed and spun into yarn. This is where you come in, because today you're heading to the weaving workshop to spin flax into gold, or at least something you can wear without getting fined for public indecency. Walking into the workshop, you're met with the sight of looms as large as a modern-day movie screen. These vertical contraptions are the heart of the operation, and they're as sophisticated as technology gets in 1500 BCE. You take your place among the weavers, mostly women, who are the unsung heroes of this economy. Forget the pharaohs. These folks are the real power players. They make the textiles that fuel trade and clothe the nation. If you think of ancient Egypt like a giant corporation, these are your CFOs, chief fabric officers. And let's not forget wool, the underdog of Egyptian textiles. While flax is the rock star, wool is like the indie band that never hits the mainstream. It's there, it's useful, but it's not what the cool kids are wearing, primarily because sheep are not as abundant as they are in, say, Mesopotamia. Still, wool finds its niche in the colder regions and among those who prefer a softer touch. But for the majority, linen is life. As you work the loom, you notice the intricate patterns being woven. These aren't just random squiggles. They are your Instagram post, your status update. Patterns and colors can signify everything from your social standing to your religious beliefs. And let's not overlook their role in trade. Egyptian textiles are so sought after that they end up in places as far-flung as Greece and the Levant. You're not just making clothes, you're crafting international relations. Now, you might be wondering about the economic implications of all this weaving. Well, let's break it down. Textiles are one of ancient Egypt's largest industries, second only to agriculture. They're a critical part of the barter economy, used to pay taxes and wages. Got a debt to settle, pay it in linen. Need to make an offering to the gods. Linen again. Want to impress your neighbor with your wealth. You guessed it, more linen. But before you romanticize this textile utopia, let's inject a bit of reality. Working conditions are less than ideal. The workshop is hot, and filled with the constant clatter of looms. You're not just weaving for fun, you're working to survive. And let's not forget the social hierarchy. While women are the majority in weaving, they're often under the oversight of male supervisors, because of course, patriarchy is as timeless as the sands of the Sahara. As your fingers work tirelessly, you can't help but marvel at the social complexity woven into each piece of fabric. Textiles are more than just material. They are a social contract, a status symbol, a religious offering, and an economic staple. And while the romantic notion of ancient Egypt might involve more gold and glamour, the reality is that it's the humble flax plant and the skilled weavers like yourself who keep the wheels of society turning. So as the sun climbs higher, casting long shadows over the bustling village. You continue to weave, each thread a testament to your role in this ancient world. It's a day in the life of a weaver in ancient Egypt, where the fabric of society is quite literally in your hands. Welcome to history. Messy, fascinating, and full of life. And just like that, you're back to the grind, weaving the fabric of society one thread at a time. Today, we're diving deeper into the nitty-gritty of ancient Egyptian weaving, where tools make the magic happen and patience is the secret ingredient. Forget your modern-day sewing machines and Pinterest-inspired DIY hacks. We're talking about vertical looms, the OG of textile tech. These looms are like the iPhones of the ancient world, sleek, efficient, and a status symbol for anyone who knows their warp from their weft. These vertical looms aren't just for show. They are the powerhouse of the weaving workshop, and using them is a skill that's honed over years, not learned from a quick YouTube tutorial. Imagine a wooden frame standing as tall as a hippo on its hind legs, with threads hanging down like the world's most complicated harp. The weavers, mostly women, work tirelessly to create textiles that range from simple cloth to elaborate tapestries featuring intricate designs that make your grandma's quilt look like a doodle. Now, let's bust some myths about these weaving wonders. First off, there's nothing seamless about this operation. This isn't some magical process where you toss in some flax fibers and out pops a perfectly tailored kilt. Nope, it takes a village, literally. To produce just one garment, it might require the labor of up to 20 workers, each contributing their expertise in various stages of the process. There's the spinning of yarn, the setting up of the loom, the actual weaving, and finally, the finishing touches. And let's talk time frames. We're not cranking out a new outfit every weekend here. A single piece of cloth could take weeks, even months, to produce. In a world without the luxury of fast fashion, patience isn't just a virtue, it's a necessity. Is it any wonder that a finely woven linen garment could command a price that would make even a Kardashian blush? Economically speaking, the cost of production is a staggering testament to the value placed on textiles. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of investing in a high-end couture piece. The labor, the skill, the sheer time involved. It's all part of the package. In fact, a well-crafted linen garment could be worth its weight in grain, the staple currency of the Egyptian economy. So next time you're complaining about the price tag on a designer label, remember that ancient Egyptians were shelling out big time for their threads, too. But let's not get all misty-eyed about the romance of ancient fashion. The reality is that weaving is back-breaking work. The looming heat, the relentless dust, and the constant clatter of the looms create an environment where the glamour quickly fades. The romantic notion of weavers as artists creating masterpieces under a golden Egyptian sun is tempered by the harsh reality of long hours and little recognition. It's a job, plain and simple, albeit one integral to the economic and social fabric of the time. As for the garments themselves, let's talk design. The vertical loom's influence on fashion was profound. It allowed for the creation of garments with vertical stripes and patterns, a style that became iconic in Egyptian attire. These patterns weren't just for aesthetics. They were a language of their own, speaking volumes about the wearer's social status, occupation, and even religious affiliations. So, while you're spinning yarns and weaving cloth, you're also crafting a story, a personal narrative told through the threads and patterns. Of course, the vertical loom is just one piece of the puzzle. The Egyptians were pioneers in their field, constantly innovating and adapting their techniques. From the introduction of new dyes to the experimentation with different thread counts, the weaving industry was a hub of creativity and ingenuity. Each new technique and tool was a step forward in the evolution of fashion, influencing not just Egyptian society, but cultures far beyond the Nile. So, as the day wears on and the shadows grow long, you continue your work, each pass of the shuttle a reminder of the legacy you're part of. In a world where textiles are as valuable as gold, your role as a weaver is both essential and empowering. You're not just making clothes, you're shaping history, one thread at a time. And who knew that the fabric of society could be so literal? As you work, you can't help but ponder the ironies of time, how something so fundamental as weaving can be both a humble craft and a cornerstone of civilization. And with that thought, you carry on, weaving your way through history, one thread at a time. And so, you carry on, weaving your way through history, one thread at a time. But let's pull back the curtain and unravel the threads connecting textiles to power, politics, and people. Weaving in ancient Egypt was more than a mundane chore. It was a loom of influence, with pharaohs spinning political yarns across borders and textiles acting as diplomatic emissaries. Forget your modern-day social media influencers. In ancient Egypt, textiles were the trending topic, with every thread woven into the fabric of society carrying weighty implications. We're talking about state-controlled textile production, folks. The pharaohs weren't just content with pyramids and obelisks. They had their fingers in the flax pie, too. The state held the tightest grip on textile production, dictating who spun what and where it all went. It wasn't just about keeping the populace clothed. It was about weaving Egypt's influence into the global tapestry. You see, textiles were the ancient world's version of a passport, often used as currency in international trade. Egyptian linen was so fine it could pass through a ring if you had the patience to try. And while the thought of Cleopatra draped in the finest linen might conjure images of opulence, let's pause for a reality check. Sure, Cleopatra could have worn the best, but the idea that she always did, that's as spun as the yarn itself. Linen was indeed prized, but it was also practical, and practicality often wins over pure luxury, especially when you're running a kingdom. Now, let's talk trade. Egyptian textiles made their way far beyond the borders of the Nile, reaching the bustling markets of Greece, Rome, and beyond. These weren't just any textiles, mind you. They were state-of-the-art, signaling Egyptian craftsmanship, and by extension, Egyptian power. The pharaohs were the original brand ambassadors, using textiles to showcase the might and sophistication of their civilization. And while we're at it, let's debunk another myth. Ancient Egypt wasn't some isolated desert kingdom. It was a hub of trade, with its textiles acting as both currency and calling card. The influence of Egyptian textiles wasn't confined to borders, though. Within the kingdom, textiles served as a social barometer, reflecting and reinforcing the hierarchical structures of society. The quality of your linen could indicate your social standing faster than a Facebook status update. From the priests swathed in immaculate robes to the laborers in their simple tunics, your attire spoke volumes about your place in the grand scheme of things. It was a textile hierarchy, a sartorial ladder where each rung was defined by the number of threads in your garment. And let's not forget the religious significance woven into the fabric. Linen was considered pure, the go-to choice for priestly garments and burial shrouds alike. It wasn't just a matter of preference, it was a matter of divine decree. The gods themselves were thought to favor linen, making its production a sacred duty in the eyes of the devout. So, while you're weaving away in the workshop, you're not merely creating cloth, you're crafting a connection to the divine, one shuttle pass at a time. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the camel in the desert. The romantic notion of the Egyptian weaver as a free artisan weaving at leisure. Yeah, not quite. The state had a vested interest in keeping the looms humming, and that often meant strict oversight and quotas. If you were a weaver, you were as much a part of the state machinery as the stonecutters building the pyramids. The pharaohs weren't just building monuments. They were constructing a textile empire, one that required constant labor and oversight. But amidst the state control and societal implications, there was room for innovation. Egyptian weavers were nothing if not resourceful, constantly tweaking their techniques and experimenting with dyes and patterns. The introduction of indigo and madder dyes added a splash of color to the textile landscape, transforming simple linen into vibrant statements of style and status. And while the state's grip was firm, it couldn't stifle the creativity that flowed from the fingertips of skilled artisans. So, as the sun sets over the Nile and the workshop's clatter fades into the evening, you're left to ponder the complex web of politics, power, and personal expression woven into each piece of cloth. The loom is more than a tool. It's a metaphor for the interconnectedness of Egyptian society, with each thread representing a life, a story, a legacy. And while the romantic allure of ancient Egypt might focus on the grandeur of its monuments and the mystique of its rulers, the real magic lies in the humble threads that held it all together. In this ancient world, where textiles were as crucial as the grain that grew along the Nile, you realize you're not just a weaver, you're a participant in a grand narrative that spans the centuries. Each thread you manipulate is a testament to the enduring power of human industry and creativity. So, As you finish your day's work, take a moment to appreciate the intricate tapestry of history you've helped to create, knowing that the fabric of society is as much a product of your labor as it is of the pharaoh's decrees. The story of Egyptian weaving is far from over, with more layers to unravel and more myths to debunk. As the loom stands ready for another day, so too do the stories of those who shaped history, one thread at a time. Stay tuned for more twists and turns in this ancient saga, where each piece of cloth is a page in the ever-unfolding book of human endeavor. And just like that, we're diving deeper into the world of ancient Egyptian weaving, where the threads of history are as tangled as a cat's cradle. Let's untangle the yarn of gender dynamics at the loom. Because let's face it, while the pharaohs hog the spotlight, it's the women quietly weaving in the background who are the real unsung heroes of this tale. So, who were these weavers? Picture a bustling workshop, or PRNFR, if you want to impress your friends with some ancient Egyptian. This was the domain of women, who were the backbone of the textile industry. They weren't just dabbling in crafts. They were the driving force behind an economy that was as dependent on linen as we are on Wi-Fi. In ancient Egypt, weaving was one of the few professions where women could flex their skills and earn a living. Forget the romanticized image of women as passive bystanders in history. These ladies were the original multitaskers, balancing the demands of family life with the rigorous work of producing textiles. They were the ones spinning, weaving, and dyeing, ensuring that the whole kingdom wasn't just running around in their birthday suits. But let's not sugarcoat it. The reality was far from idyllic. Working conditions were tough, and the hours were long. We're talking about spending up to 12 hours a day in a hot, dusty workshop, with only the constant clatter of looms for company. And the pay? Let's just say it wasn't exactly what you'd call a livable wage. A weaver's daily income could be as low as a few loaves of bread and a jug of beer. That's not exactly a recipe for early retirement. Yet, in this male-dominated society, women weavers were indispensable. They held the keys to the kingdom's wardrobe, quite literally weaving the fabric of daily life. And while they may not have held political power, they wielded economic influence. Linen was currency, after all, and these women were the mint. Now, let's flip the fabric and examine the male supervisors who oversaw these operations. Because, of course, a patriarchal society wouldn't be complete without a bit of mansplaining. Male overseers were often in charge of directing the work, setting quotas, and ensuring the pharaoh's textile demands were met. They were the middle managers of the ancient world, balancing the needs of the state with the labor of the weavers. But even they were cogs in a much larger machine. The pharaohs had an insatiable appetite for luxury textiles, and the pressure to produce was immense. The state-run workshops were the Amazon fulfillment centers of their day, churning out linen at an industrial scale. And while the pharaohs lounged in their palaces, swathed in the finest fabrics, the weavers toiled away, their labor a testament to the harsh realities of life under the sun god Ra. Yet, amidst the sweat and toil, there was room for artistry. Skilled weavers could create intricate patterns and vibrant colors that transformed simple cloth into a canvas. Their work wasn't just functional, it was expressive, a reflection of individual skill and creativity. In a world where individuality was often subsumed by the collective, these weavers found a way to leave their mark. Economically, weaving was a linchpin of the ancient Egyptian economy. Textiles were more than just clothing. They were a form of wealth, a means of barter, and a way to pay taxes. And while the romantic notion of ancient Egypt might focus on the grandeur of its monuments and the mystique of its rulers, the real wealth lay in the hands of the weavers. But let's not romanticize the past too much. The life of a weaver was one of hardship and struggle. The constant demand for textiles meant that there was little room for rest. And while the rewards were meager, the work was relentless. The looms were as unforgiving as the desert sun, and the weavers' lives were shaped by the rhythm of the warp and weft. Yet, despite the challenges, these weavers were a vital part of the ancient Egyptian story. They were the ones who clothed a civilization, who wove the very fabric of history. While their names may not be etched in stone like the pharaohs, their legacy endures in the threads they spun. So, as you picture these ancient workshops, filled with the hum of activity and the clatter of looms, remember the women who made it all possible. They were the unseen architects of a society that thrived on their labor. Their story is one of resilience and strength, a testament to the enduring power of human creativity. As we weave our way through history, one thread at a time. Let's not forget the hands that held the shuttle, that wove the patterns of the past into the fabric of today. The story is far from over, and there's more to unravel in the intricate tapestry of ancient Egypt. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll dive deeper into this ancient world and the lives of those who shaped it. And as we weave our way through history, one thread at a time, let's unravel how these ancient techniques have threaded their way into the fabric of modern life. You see, while the looms of ancient Egypt have long stopped clattering, their echo resonates through today's textile industry. It's like a game of historical telephone, where the message gets a bit garbled, but still carries the original intent. Let's start with the basics. The ancient Egyptians weren't just weaving clothes, they were weaving innovation. Those vertical looms they used, the grandities of today's industrial machines. While we might boast about our high-tech gadgets, the fundamental principles of weaving haven't changed much since Cleopatra was a fashion icon. We're still talking about warp and weft, the textile equivalent of peanut butter and jelly, two threads coming together to create something greater than the sum of their parts. And speaking of parts, let's talk durability. Ever wonder why those ancient tunics lasted long enough to be studied by modern archaeologists? One word: quality. A well-made Egyptian linen tunic could last for years, even decades. Compare that to today's fast fashion disasters, where a shirt might not survive a single season. In a world obsessed with the next big trend, it's worth remembering that once upon a time, the best wardrobe investment was a tunic that could outlive a dynasty. Now, let's bring it back to the modern textile industry, worth a whopping $3 trillion globally. That's with a T, by the way. While we're busy cranking out synthetic fibers and polyester blends, there's a growing appreciation for natural fibers like linen. You could say ancient Egyptians were the original hipsters, using organic materials before it was cool. Today, linen is still prized for its sustainability and comfort, a testament to the ingenuity of those ancient artisans who spun flax into pure gold. But let's not get too misty-eyed about the romance of the past. The reality of ancient Egyptian weaving was far from a leisurely craft. Those hours spent in hot, dusty workshops were grueling. Yet, despite the sweat and the strain, these weavers were laying the groundwork for an industry that sustains billions of people worldwide. The textile industry today employs over 60 million people, many in developing countries where the conditions aren't unlike those ancient workshops. And here's a twist for you. While we think of Egypt as the land of linen, wool and other fibers are making a comeback thanks to modern innovations. We're using ancient techniques to create textiles that can regulate body temperature or even monitor health. Imagine explaining that to an Egyptian weaver. Yes, your tunic can now tell you when you're dehydrated. Ancient technology meets modern absurdity. Economically, textiles were the ancient world's stock market. Linen wasn't just a fabric. It was a currency, a status symbol, and a political tool. It was traded across borders, influencing economies from the Aegean to Mesopotamia. Today, textiles remain a global powerhouse, influencing trade policies and economic strategies. The more things change, the more they stay the same, right? And let's not forget the political threads. Just as pharaohs controlled textile production to assert dominance, modern governments use trade agreements and tariffs to do the same. The textile industry is a battlefield of economic warfare, where countries vie for dominance with every shipment of fabric. The ancient Egyptians might have been the original textile titans, but today's players are no less strategic. But as we step back from the loom, it's important to acknowledge the complex social dynamics that have woven themselves into the fabric of history. Ancient Egyptian weavers, mostly women, were the unsung architects of a thriving economy. Their legacy persists in a world where gender equality is still a work in progress. In some ways, those ancient workshops were a microcosm of today's gender dynamics in the textile industry, where women often make up the majority of the workforce, yet hold a fraction of the leadership roles. So, as you lay down your metaphorical shuttle for the night, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of these ancient artisans. They were more than just weavers. They were innovators, economists, and social architects. Their work was the thread that held society together, a delicate balance of artistry and necessity. And there you have it, the remarkable story of ancient Egyptian weaving, a tapestry woven with threads of innovation, resilience, and enduring influence. As the sun sets on this tale, remember the hands that spun the yarns of history, crafting a legacy that stretches across millennia and still influences the clothes on our backs today. In this world of fast fashion and fleeting trends, the story of those ancient weavers reminds us of the value of quality, the power of ingenuity, and the importance of every thread in the fabric of history. So, as you drift into sleep, let the echoes of the looms guide you into dreams of a time when every garment was a work of art, a testament to human creativity and endurance. Good night, and may the threads of history weave you a tapestry of dreams as rich and intricate as the legacy of ancient Egypt itself. Charlemagne, the Frankish king with a penchant for collecting titles like a medieval Game of Thrones character, wasn't just content with ruling a vast swath of Europe. Oh no, this guy had bigger fish to fry, or perhaps, more accurately, bigger crowns to wear. You see, in a move that would make any modern-day influencer jealous, Charlemagne managed to snag the ultimate medieval status symbol. He was crowned Emperor of the Romans in 800 AD. That's right. While most people were busy trying to survive the Dark Ages, Charlemagne was out there reviving the glory of Rome. Talk about ambitious. In this grand coronation ceremony, which took place on Christmas Day, because why not steal the limelight from the birth of Jesus? Pope Leo Roman III placed the imperial crown on Charlemagne's head in the majestic setting of St. Peter's Basilica. This wasn't just a fancy hat trick, though. It was a political masterstroke, a move that signaled the rebirth of the Roman Empire in the West, or at least a cleverly marketed version of it. So, what was Charlemagne really up to here? Was he just a history buff with a flair for theatrics, or was there more to his imperial aspirations? Let's break it down. Charlemagne, whose name literally means Charles the Great, and he definitely leaned into that, had a vision. He wanted to create a unified Christian empire, sort of European Union avant la lettre, but with more swords and fewer bureaucrats. He was driven by the idea of renovatio imperii, or the renewal of the Roman Empire, which was a big deal back then. Imagine trying to bring back the glory days of a civilization that had been kaput for over 3 centuries. It's like someone today trying to revive the disco era. Bold, perhaps misguided, but undeniably ambitious. But Charlemagne wasn't just some medieval dreamer. He was a savvy political operator who understood the power dynamics of his time. His alliance with the Pope was no accident. In fact, it was more like a medieval political chess game with a high-stakes twist. The Pope needed protection from his enemies in Rome, and Charlemagne needed legitimacy to solidify his control over his vast territories. It was a classic case of you scratch my back, I scratch yours, except instead of backs, it was more like crowns and papal blessings. This alliance with the Church was crucial. It was the medieval equivalent of getting a celebrity endorsement, but instead of selling sneakers, Charlemagne was selling the idea of a unified Christian empire. By aligning himself with the Pope, Charlemagne was able to legitimize his rule and expand his influence across Europe. And let's be real, having the Pope in your corner was like having the ultimate PR team. It's hard to argue with divine approval. Of course, this was more than just a personal power grab. Charlemagne's coronation was a seismic event that reshaped the European landscape. It marked the beginning of what historians lovingly call the Carolingian Renaissance, a cultural and intellectual revival that aimed to bring back the glory of Rome. Schools were established, Latin was standardized, and scholars from all over Europe flocked to Charlemagne's court in Aachen, turning it into a vibrant center of learning. It was like the Hogwarts of the early Middle Ages, minus the magic wands and talking hats. However, let's not get too carried away with romantic notions of a medieval utopia. The reality was far more complex. For one, the Carolingian Renaissance was less about creating a new golden age and more about survival in a harsh and uncertain world. Charlemagne's empire was constantly under threat from external enemies and internal divisions. Viking raids were a constant menace, and keeping the empire together was a bit like herding cats if the cats were heavily armed and prone to rebellion. Moreover, the alliance with the Pope wasn't all sunshine and roses. It came with strings attached, as all good deals do. Charlemagne had to walk a fine line between asserting his imperial authority and respecting the Church's autonomy. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required all of Charlemagne's diplomatic skill and military might. And while the coronation boosted Charlemagne's prestige, it also set a precedent for future power struggles between the church and the state, a theme that would play out for centuries to come. In essence, Charlemagne's quest to revive the glory of Rome was a complex tapestry of ambition, politics, and ideology. It was about creating a legacy that would endure beyond his reign, a legacy that would shape the course of European history for generations. Whether he succeeded in that goal is a matter of interpretation, but there's no denying that Charlemagne's impact was profound. His coronation as Emperor of the Romans was more than just a crowning moment. It was the opening act in a grand historical drama that would unfold over the centuries. So, as we look back at this pivotal moment in history, let's remember that Charlemagne's story is not just about crowns and empires. It's about the power of ideas, the complexities of politics, and the enduring quest for greatness. And while the Carolingian Renaissance may not have brought back the glory of Rome in its entirety, it certainly left an indelible mark on the medieval world, a mark that continues to intrigue and inspire us to this day. The legacy of Charlemagne's ambitions, including his crowning moment of imperial theatrics, wasn't just about pomp and circumstance. Nope, this guy had a plan to back up that shiny new title with some serious cultural clout. Into the educational reforms of the Carolingian Empire, a bold attempt to make Latin the lingua franca of intellect once more. And who better to lead this charge than the medieval equivalent of the Avengers? We're talking about scholars like Alcuin of York, who were assembled not with superpowers, but with the power of the pen and the mind. Charlemagne, ever the visionary, knew that a unified Christian empire needed more than just swords and alliances. It needed a standardized education system. Think of it as the medieval version of Common Core, but with more parchment and fewer standardized tests. The goal: to combat the medieval equivalent of fake news and ensure that clergymen and administrators across his empire were singing from the same hymn sheet, literally. This was no small feat in an age when literacy was about as common as a unicorn sighting. Now, before we get too misty-eyed about this intellectual renaissance, let's remember that this was more about necessity than enlightenment. Charlemagne's empire stretched across modern-day France, Germany, and parts of Italy, and communication was key. A common language and curriculum were essential to manage such a sprawling territory. Latin, the ancient language of the Romans, was dusted off and given a new lease on life. It was the linguistic glue holding the empire together, ensuring that everyone from Aachen to the Adriatic was on the same page, literally and figuratively. Alcuin of York, the intellectual heavyweight invited to Charlemagne's court, became the man of the hour. A Northumbrian scholar with a penchant for grammar and logic, Alcuin was tasked with leading the charge in educational reform. His mission: to revamp the educational system and establish the 7 liberal arts as the foundation of learning: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. You can almost picture him in a toga, rallying the troops with cries of "Make Latin great again." But like any ambitious reform, this was easier said than done. Imagine trying to implement a curriculum in an age without Google or Wikipedia. No quick searches, no online courses, just a lot of ink-stained fingers and painstakingly copied manuscripts. Not to mention the challenge of teaching in an era where parchment was as precious as gold. Yet, Charlemagne and his scholars persevered, establishing cathedral and monastic schools that would become the educational backbone of the empire. These schools were tasked with producing literate clergy and officials, the bureaucrats and priests of tomorrow. It was an uphill battle against ignorance, but Charlemagne was determined. And while we might chuckle at the idea of knights and nobles poring over Latin declensions, this was serious business. After all, a well-educated clergy was essential for maintaining the religious legitimacy of the empire, a fact not lost on Charlemagne, who understood that knowledge was power. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Was this educational push genuinely about fostering intellectual curiosity, or was it a clever way to consolidate power? The answer, as with most things in history, is a bit of both. Sure, Charlemagne wanted to enlighten his subjects, but he also needed a loyal and capable administration to keep his empire running smoothly. It was about creating a society capable of understanding and implementing his vision. a vision that relied heavily on a unified Christian doctrine and Roman-inspired governance. And let's not forget the economic implications. An educated populace was more efficient, better able to manage the empire's resources, and less likely to be swayed by the local snake oil salesman peddling dubious relics. Education was an investment in stability, a way to ensure that the empire's bureaucracy ran like a well-oiled machine, even if that machine was powered by candlelight and quill pens. Of course, this grand experiment in education wasn't without its hiccups. Resistance was inevitable, particularly from those who saw the old ways as good enough. Not everyone was thrilled about spending their days conjugating Latin verbs or grappling with Euclidean geometry. And while we might romanticize the image of a medieval classroom, the truth was often far less glamorous. Teaching was a slog, and students weren't always the eager sponges of knowledge we like to imagine. But despite these challenges, Charlemagne's educational reforms left an indelible mark on the medieval world. They laid the groundwork for what would eventually become some of Europe's most prestigious universities. The Carolingian Renaissance, for all its mythical lore, was as much about pragmatic governance as it was about intellectual flourishing. It was a testament to the power of ideas, the importance of communication, and the enduring quest for knowledge in a world often shrouded in darkness. As we ponder the legacy of Charlemagne and his medieval avengers, let's remember that history is rarely black and white. The reality of the Carolingian Renaissance was complex, a tapestry woven from ambition, necessity, and a touch of idealism. And while Latin may not have become the universal language of Europe, the seeds of education sown during this period would continue to grow, shaping the intellectual landscape for centuries to come. So, as we leave Charlemagne and his crew to their conjugations and calculations, let's tip our hats to their efforts. They may not have had the internet, but they had determination, vision, and a fair bit of audacity. And in the grand scheme of history, that's a legacy worth celebrating. Stay tuned, history buffs, because the story of the Carolingian Empire is far from over. We've got more medieval intrigue, power plays, and cultural revivals to explore. And speaking of legacies worth celebrating, let's pivot to Charlemagne's equally ambitious economic reforms. Because what's an empire without a little cash flow, right? Now, if you think medieval economics sounds as thrilling as watching paint dry, hold onto your helmets. Charlemagne's economic policies were like trying to build a skyscraper on a foundation of quicksand. This guy was operating in a world where stability was about as common as a unicorn in a business suit. Picture a sprawling empire, stretching from the Pyrenees to the Danube, held together by the threads of feudal loyalty and a shared faith. But while Charlemagne was busy weaving his cultural and educational tapestries, he was also trying to keep the economic wheels from falling off. Enter the silver penny, the piece de resistance of Charlemagne's economic reforms. Minted in the 700 AD, this little coin was designed to standardize currency across the empire, replacing a mishmash of local currencies that would make a modern-day numismatist weep. The silver penny wasn't just a shiny trinket, it was a statement. A standardized currency was crucial for trade, and trade was the lifeblood of the empire. By linking the value of the penny to a specific weight in silver, Charlemagne was trying to inject some much-needed consistency into economic transactions. Think of it as the medieval version of hitting the reset button on your Wi-Fi router, hoping to clear up the static and get things running smoothly. But let's not get too starry-eyed about this economic masterstroke. The implementation was about as smooth as a Viking raid. Charlemagne's empire, with its patchwork of regions and cultures, was like trying to herd cats, if those cats were fiercely independent and had their own currencies. And while the silver penny was a step towards unification, it wasn't a magic bullet. The reality was that local economies were still largely agrarian, and a shiny new penny wasn't going to change the fact that most people were bartering their way through life, trading chickens for firewood and hoping for a good harvest. And speaking of trade, Charlemagne's empire wasn't just sitting on its laurels. Oh no, the revival of trade routes was another key component of his economic strategy. We're talking about a time when the Silk Road wasn't just a catchy name, but a critical artery for goods, ideas, and cultural exchange. Charlemagne understood that for his empire to thrive, it needed to be plugged into these networks, like a medieval LinkedIn, but with more spices and fewer profile pictures. The revival of these trade routes didn't just mean more exotic goods reaching the far-flung corners of the empire. It also meant more taxes, more revenue, and more clout. Charlemagne's efforts to secure and expand these routes were a testament to his vision of a prosperous, interconnected empire. But as with all things medieval, it wasn't without its challenges. Pirates, bandits, and political rivalries were the medieval equivalent of traffic jams and cyber attacks, threatening the smooth flow of commerce at every turn. And while Charlemagne was busy playing the long game, trying to turn his empire into a beacon of economic stability, average peasant was more concerned with keeping the wolves from the door, literally and metaphorically. For the common folk, Charlemagne's grand visions of economic reform were about as relevant as a jousting tournament in a rainstorm. They were more preoccupied with the day-to-day struggle of not starving, of keeping their families fed and their taxes paid. Let's be real here. The economic reforms, while crucial for the empire's stability, were a double-edged sword for the peasantry. On one hand, a standardized currency and revived trade routes offered the promise of new opportunities, of better access to goods and markets. On the other hand, these same reforms often meant increased taxation and greater demands from the feudal lords. It was a classic case of trickle-down economics, medieval style, where the trickling was often more of a slow drip than a steady flow. And yet, despite the hardships, the average medieval peasant was nothing if not resilient. They navigated the complexities of Charlemagne's economic policies with a mix of grit and ingenuity, making do with what they had and hoping for the best. It was a tough existence, but one that was deeply rooted in the rhythms of the land, in the cycles of planting and harvest that dictated the pace of life. Charlemagne's economic reforms, while ambitious, were ultimately a reflection of the broader challenges facing his empire. They were an attempt to bring order out of chaos, to impose a semblance of stability on a world that was inherently unstable. And while the results were mixed, there's no denying the scale of Charlemagne's vision. He was trying to build an empire that could stand the test of time, an empire that could weather the storms of history. So as we contemplate the economic legacies of Charlemagne's reign, let's remember that history is a messy, complicated affair. The silver penny, the revival of trade routes, the attempts to stabilize an empire that was as volatile as a medieval stock market. All these elements were part of a larger tapestry, a tapestry woven from ambition, necessity, and a fair bit of audacity. And while Charlemagne's economic policies may not have been a panacea, they were a testament to his determination to leave a lasting mark on the medieval world. As the story of the Carolingian Empire continues to unfold, let's keep our eyes on the bigger picture. Charlemagne's legacy is one of innovation and adaptation, of trying to navigate the complexities of a world that was constantly changing. And while his economic reforms were just one piece of the puzzle, they were a crucial piece, a piece that helped shape the course of European history for generations to come. So stay tuned, history buffs, because the saga of Charlemagne and his empire is far from over. We've got more twists, turns, and medieval machinations to explore. Now, if Charlemagne's economic reforms were a balancing act on a medieval tightrope, his cultural and artistic revival was more like a high-flying trapeze without a safety net. Enter the monks, those hooded scribes who became the original influencers, long before TikTok was a twinkle in Silicon Valley's eye. These were the guys who took the Carolingian Renaissance to new heights, wielding quills instead of smartphones, and spreading ideas faster than you could say scriptorium. Let's talk about manuscript illumination, a term that sounds like it should come with a glow-in-the-dark sticker, but actually refers to those intricate, vibrant illustrations that lit up medieval texts. Think of it as the visual clickbait of the age, designed to catch your eye and keep you scrolling, or in this case, flipping pages. These weren't just pretty pictures, though. They were a strategic blend of art and communication, a way to make religious texts accessible and engaging to a largely illiterate population. Kind of like a medieval graphic novel, but with more halos and fewer superheroes. Now, before you get swept up in the romance of monks hunched over their desks, painstakingly adding gold leaf to the Virgin Mary's robes, let's get real. This was less about art for art's sake, and more about control and communication. You see, Charlemagne understood that a well-illuminated manuscript was a powerful tool. It was like having a billboard in every church and monastery, broadcasting the empire's religious and political messages in full technicolor. And while these illuminated manuscripts were indeed works of art, they were also instruments of influence, shaping the beliefs and behaviors of those who encountered them. Speaking of influence, let's not forget the Carolingian minuscule, arguably the empire's most underrated contribution to Western civilization. This wasn't just another pretty font. It was a revolutionary script that transformed the way people read and wrote. Gone were the days of cramped, illegible scrawl that gave Latin a bad name. The minuscule was all about clarity and consistency, with its neat, rounded letters that made manuscripts easier to read and copy. Think of it as the Helvetica of the Middle Ages, clean, efficient, and destined to take over the world. The Carolingian minuscule wasn't just a typographical triumph. It was a tool of unification. It standardized written communication across the empire, ensuring that everyone, from the bishop in Barcelona to the abbot in Aachen, was literally on the same page. This was crucial in a time when miscommunication could lead to anything from a minor misunderstanding to a full-blown theological crisis. The minuscule was about more than just aesthetics. It was about control, about ensuring that the empire's edicts and the church's doctrines were communicated clearly and effectively. And let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't just about spreading the good word. It was also about bureaucracy, that inescapable undercurrent of any large organization. The church wasn't just a spiritual body. It was a vast administrative machine, and efficient communication was the oil that kept its gears turning. The Carolingian minuscule, with its emphasis on legibility and uniformity, was a godsend for church administrators tasked with maintaining order in a sprawling empire. Imagine trying to manage a network as vast and complex as the Carolingian church without a standardized script. It would be like trying to run a multinational corporation with post-it notes and carrier pigeons. Now, I know what you're thinking. Surely there must have been some creative freedom in all this. Well, yes and no. While the monks who toiled away in the scriptoriums had some artistic license, adding flourishes and details to make each manuscript unique, they were also working within strict guidelines. This was about as free-spirited as a medieval monk could get. The church's messages needed to be consistent, and there was little room for improvisation when you were copying the Word of God. It was a delicate dance between creativity and conformity, a balancing act that defined much of the Carolingian cultural revival. And let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer logistics of this operation. Imagine coordinating the production of manuscripts across an empire where travel was slow, resources were scarce, and the threat of Viking raids was as real as a sword to the gut. This was no small feat, and it required a level of organization that would impress even the most seasoned project manager. The monks, with their steady hands and keen eyes, were the unsung heroes of this cultural renaissance, ensuring that the empire's messages were disseminated far and wide. Of course, the church played a central role in this cultural shift, serving as both patron and gatekeeper. The line between faith and bureaucracy was as blurred as the ink on a rainy day, with the church using its influence to both inspire and control. This was a time when the Pope wielded as much power as any king, and his blessing was as valuable as a chest full of gold. By aligning themselves with the church, Charlemagne and his successors ensured that their cultural revival had the divine stamp of approval, a crucial factor in an age where religion was the ultimate authority. But let's not romanticize this relationship too much. The alliance between the church and the empire was as much about pragmatism as it was about piety. It was a strategic partnership, a mutually beneficial arrangement that allowed both parties to consolidate power and influence. The church provided the moral and spiritual guidance, while the empire offered protection and resources. It was a match made in heaven, or at least in the corridors of power. And while the cultural and artistic achievements of the Carolingian Renaissance are undeniable, it's important to remember that they were born out of necessity as much as ambition. The illuminated manuscripts and the Carolingian minuscule were tools of communication and control, designed to unify a diverse empire and reinforce the authority of both church and state. They were the medieval equivalent of a strategic communications plan, a way to ensure that the empire's messages were heard loud and clear. But let's not forget the human element in all this. Behind every illuminated manuscript, behind every neatly penned line of Carolingian minuscule, were the monks, the unsung heroes of this cultural revival. These were ordinary men with extraordinary skills, working tirelessly to preserve and propagate the knowledge and beliefs of their time. They were the original content creators, shaping the cultural landscape of the medieval world one page at a time. So, as we delve deeper into the story of the Carolingian Empire, let's remember the monks and their quills, the scribes and their scripts. Let's appreciate the artistry and the ambition, the creativity and the control that defined this cultural renaissance. And let's keep in mind that history is rarely black and white, rarely as simple as it seems. The story of the Carolingian cultural revival is a tapestry of ambition, necessity, and human ingenuity, a story that continues to captivate and inspire us to this day. And with that, dear history buffs, we leave Charlemagne's scribes to their illuminated manuscripts and medieval fonts, poised to explore more of the Carolingian Empire's twists and turns in the next chapter of our saga. Stay tuned for more intrigue, more power plays, and more stories from the heart of the medieval world. As we bid adieu to those medieval scribes laboring over their quills and parchment, it's time to take a step back and assess the real impact of this so-called Carolingian Renaissance. Was it a genuine revival or just history's most elaborate PR campaign? Well, buckle up, history buffs, because we're about to dive into the murky waters of legacy, influence, and the not-so-glamorous reality of empires that crumble faster than a medieval gingerbread castle. First off, let's talk about the term Renaissance. Today, it conjures images of Leonardo da Vinci painting dreamily while Michelangelo chisels away at marble. But in Charlemagne's time, it was less about humanism and more about survival. Sure, Charlemagne deserves credit for his ambitious educational reforms and cultural patronage, but let's be honest. His Renaissance was as much about necessity as it was about enlightenment. His empire was a patchwork quilt of diverse peoples and languages, and he needed a common thread to stitch it together. The revival of learning and the standardization of Latin were pragmatic attempts to ensure everyone was singing from the same hymn sheet, literally. But if we're going to talk about legacy, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, the rapid disintegration of Charlemagne's empire after his death in 814 AD. It's like he built a sandcastle on the beach and then left it to the mercy of the tide. Within a few decades, the Carolingian Empire had fractured into a dozen petty kingdoms, each ruled by a descendant more interested in personal power than imperial unity. The Treaty of Verdun in 843 was the final nail in the coffin, slicing the empire into three distinct parts and setting the stage for future European nations like France and Germany. So much for a unified Christian empire. And why did it all fall apart? Well, for starters, Charlemagne's empire was held together by his sheer force of will. He was a larger-than-life figure, and when he exited stage left, there wasn't anyone with the same charisma or strategic brilliance to fill his shoes. His sons and grandsons were more concerned with squabbling over titles than building on his legacy. It's a classic case of too many cooks spoiling the broth, or in this case, too many heirs spoiling the empire. Moreover, the external threats that Charlemagne had spent his reign fending off didn't magically disappear. Viking raids, Magyar incursions, and Saracen piracy continued to chip away at the empire's borders, like termites in a wooden beam. Without a strong central authority to coordinate defenses, these threats became existential crises. And while Charlemagne's administrative reforms were impressive on paper, they were only as strong as the men charged with enforcing them. If those men were more interested in their own power than the empire's stability, well, you can guess how that turned out. Now, don't get me wrong, Charlemagne's reign wasn't just a series of unfortunate events. The cultural and educational reforms he initiated had long-lasting effects, laying the groundwork for the rise of universities and the intellectual flowering of the High Middle Ages. The Carolingian minuscule, that neat little script we mentioned earlier, became the foundation for modern European writing. In a way, Charlemagne's legacy was like planting seeds that wouldn't bloom until long after his empire had crumbled to dust. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Carolingian Renaissance wasn't a golden age of peace and prosperity. It was a time of transition, of struggle, of trying to impose order on chaos. Charlemagne's vision of a unified Christian empire was a grand idea, but reality had other plans. The political fragmentation that followed his death foreshadowed the complex tapestry of medieval Europe, where kingdoms rose and fell with alarming regularity. And yet, despite the empire's rapid disintegration, Charlemagne's legacy endures. He's remembered as one of Europe's greatest leaders, a symbol of unity in a fractured world. His story is the stuff of legends, a tale of ambition, vision, and a touch of hubris. But history remembers the Carolingians as more than just a lineup of medieval rulers with unpronounceable names. They were the architects of a cultural revival that, while imperfect, paved the way for future generations. So, was the Carolingian Renaissance a genuine Renaissance, or just a medieval PR stunt? The answer, as always, lies somewhere in between. It was both a bold attempt to revive the past and a necessary response to the challenges of the present. It was a story of ambition and failure, of vision and limitation. And in the end, it reminds us that history is not a straight line, but a series of twists and turns, of triumphs and setbacks. As we wrap up our journey through the tangled web of the Carolingian Empire, let's take a moment to reflect on the complexities of legacy. Charlemagne's dream of a unified Europe may have fizzled out, but his impact was undeniable. He was a man of his time, navigating the treacherous waters of medieval politics with a mixture of cunning and conviction. And while his empire may have crumbled, his ideas continue to shape the course of history. So, as you drift off to sleep with visions of medieval monks and silver pennies, remember that history is a tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, necessity, and human ingenuity. The story of the Carolingians is just one chapter in the grand saga of the past, a chapter filled with lessons that continue to resonate today. And while we may never fully unravel the complexities of their legacy, we can appreciate the tapestry they left behind, a tapestry that continues to inspire and intrigue us in equal measure. Akhenaten was the kind of guy who looked at Egypt's ancient religious traditions, some 500 years in the making, and thought, "No, thank you. I'll have what asterisk he's asterisk having," pointing to the sun. It all started when Amenhotep IV, as he was originally known, took the throne around 1353 BCE, ready to shake things up like a pharaoh-sized cocktail shaker. Born into the prestigious 18th dynasty, young Amenhotep was the second son of Pharaoh Amenhotep III and Queen Tiye. His rise to power was unexpected since his elder brother, Thutmose, was the original heir apparent. But as fate and the ancient Egyptian penchant for drama would have it, Thutmose exited stage left, leaving Amenhotep to step into the spotlight. From the get-go, Amenhotep IV was a bit of an odd duckling in the Nile's royal pond. While most Egyptian rulers were content to build temples to the gods and occasionally wrestle with the Hittites, Amenhotep IV had other plans. Maybe he got tired of the crowded Egyptian pantheon, where gods were more numerous than a modern-day superhero franchise. Or perhaps he just wanted to stand out in a lineage where everyone's name sounded alarmingly similar. Whatever the reason, he was set on turning Egypt's religious tradition on its head. Now, ancient Egypt was a place where religion was woven into the very fabric of daily life. The pantheon was a bustling metropolis of deities, with each god and goddess holding sway over different aspects of existence. But Amenhotep IV saw the sun disk, Aten, shining brightly above all. So, like a teenager going through a rebellious phase, he declared that Aten was the only god worth worshipping. This was a bold move, somewhat akin to announcing that from now on, everyone was going to listen to just one song on repeat forever. And he wasn't just talking the talk, he walked the walk by changing his name to Akhenaten, meaning beneficial to Aten. Talk about a rebranding strategy. But let's not gloss over the audacity of this move. Egypt had been polytheistic since before the pyramids were a twinkle in Khufu's eye. The gods were not just a religious fixture, they were the state's very foundation. So, when Akhenaten decided to banish the old deities to the spiritual retirement home and install Aten as the head honcho, it was nothing short of revolutionary. Or, as some of his contemporaries might have said, absolutely bonkers. Of course, no good revolution comes without its share of challenges. Akhenaten's religious reform didn't just ruffle feathers. It plucked them clean out. Priests of Ammon, the most powerful god in the pantheon, were suddenly out of a job, and they weren't exactly thrilled about their sudden career changes. Imagine being a high priest one day and a disgruntled ex-priest the next. That's some serious workplace drama. But Akhenaten was nothing if not committed. He went all in, even moving the capital from Thebes to a brand new city he named Akhenaten, known today as Ammon. This wasn't just a change of address. It was a massive, costly undertaking. The construction of Akhenaten was a logistical feat that would have made the builders of the Great Pyramids raise an eyebrow. It featured sprawling temples, palaces, and the grandeur you'd expect from a pharaoh who believed he was divinely inspired. To top it off, Akhenaten's artistic tastes were as unconventional as his religious views. Gone were the rigid, idealized depictions of Pharaoh's past. Instead, art during his reign showed a more relaxed, almost casual Pharaoh, depicted with his family in intimate, almost human-like portrayals. This was a radical departure from the stiff royal iconography that had defined Egyptian art for centuries. Imagine the Egyptian equivalent of a royal Instagram account filled with candid family moments, long before that was a thing. Despite his best efforts, Akhenaten's sun-drenched utopia wasn't built to last. His focus on religious reform and the neglect of traditional diplomatic and military duties left Egypt vulnerable. But for a time, there he was, basking in the glow of Aten, reshaping a nation's spiritual landscape with the confidence of someone who had just discovered the one true path, or at least believed he had. Akhenaten's reign was a curious case of what happens when a pharaoh decides that less is more in the most populous pantheon of gods. His story is a reminder that even in the ancient world, change was the only constant, and revolutions could be as bright and fleeting as a sunrise. So, as Akhenaten basked in the Aten's glow, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of what his grand plans meant for Egypt's political and social landscape. You see, when Akhenaten decided to up sticks and move the capital to Akhenaten, it wasn't just a case of packing a few bags and calling the royal movers. This was more like a nationwide Marie Kondo operation, clearing out the old clutter of Thebes and making way for a sunlit minimalist utopia. The whole affair was as monumental as it was disruptive. Picture this, a brand new city sprouting in the middle of nowhere, like a luxurious mirage in the desert. It took just 4 years to erect Akhenaten, an impressive feat considering we're talking about 1346 BCE, not a modern construction site with cranes and power tools. The city stretched along the Nile's eastern bank, about 365 kilometers north of Thebes, and covered a whopping 20 square kilometers. It was a sprawling metropolis of temples and palaces dedicated solely to Aten, a god who probably hadn't anticipated such a lavish fan club. The economic implications of this grand relocation were about as welcome as a sandstorm at a picnic. Imagine the Treasury's reaction. Funding an entire city from scratch meant siphoning resources from established hubs like Thebes, Memphis, and Heliopolis. To say the economy was stressed is like saying the Sahara is a bit dry. Taxation had to be restructured, labor redistributed, and trade routes rerouted to support the new capital, straining the resources of an already complex economy. The financial ripple effects were felt far and wide, leaving many wondering if Aten was worth all this fuss. Meanwhile, the priesthood was reeling from Akhenaten's spiritual shake-up. This wasn't just a change in the religious playbook. It was as if the CEO of a major corporation had decided to pivot from selling cars to making artisanal bread, leaving the board of directors scrambling to make sense of it all. The priests of Ammon, who once wielded immense power and wealth, found themselves sidelined, their temples overshadowed by Akhenaten's sunlit splendor. This wasn't just a demotion, it was a full-blown existential crisis. In the old capital of Thebes, the priests of Ammon were accustomed to living large, with estates and influence that rivaled the pharaoh himself. But in Akhenaten's new world order, they were suddenly out of a job, their divine heartline disconnected. It was a bit like finding out your tech startup had been rendered obsolete by a kid with a laptop in his garage. The priests didn't take this lying down. They were a powerful faction, and their discontent simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to boil over. Socially, the move to Akhenaten was a mixed bag. For some, it was an exciting opportunity, a chance to be part of a bold new future. For others, it was more of an enforced pilgrimage to a city that felt as foreign as an alien planet. Families uprooted, artisans and laborers reallocated, all in service of Akhenaten's sun-worshipping vision. It was a seismic shift in daily life, and not everyone was thrilled about swapping their cozy Theban homes for the windswept plains of Amarna. And then there was the art. Oh, the art. Akhenaten's reign brought with it a whole new aesthetic, one that was as unconventional as it was fascinating. Gone were the stoic, idealized forms of the past. In their place were fluid, exaggerated depictions of the royal family, with Akhenaten himself portrayed in such a curious manner that he might have been mistaken for an avant-garde sculpture. Critics of the time might have been perplexed, but hey, it was all in the spirit of embracing the new, the daring, the unorthodox. Politically, Akhenaten's religious revolution left a power vacuum that had implications beyond Egypt's borders. Allies and enemies alike watched with bemusement and concern. The Hittites, for instance, couldn't help but notice Egypt's inward focus, and they weren't exactly shy about exploiting the situation. Akhenaten's neglect of foreign policy was like leaving the front door open with a "Do Not Disturb" sign, an invitation for opportunistic neighbors to make themselves at home. Meanwhile, the internal dynamics of Egyptian society were undergoing a metamorphosis. The old guard, the bureaucrats, the military leaders, the influential families, found themselves navigating a new political landscape where the rules were changing faster than the sands of the desert. Some adapted, some resisted, and others bided their time, waiting for the winds of change to blow in their favor. In essence, Akhenaten's religious revolution was a grand experiment in reshaping an entire civilization. It was like a massive game of Jenga, with each piece representing a pillar of Egyptian society. By pulling out the guards and reshuffling the capital, Akhenaten was testing the limits of what the structure could withstand. The results were as unpredictable as they were fascinating, leaving us with a legacy that continues to intrigue and puzzle historians to this day. As we ponder the complexities of Akhenaten's reign, it's clear that his vision was both audacious and flawed, a bold attempt to redefine a nation that ultimately left more questions than answers. The stage was set for the next act, where the repercussions of his radical choices would unfold in ways even he couldn't have foreseen. But for now, let's close the chapter on this sun-kissed revolution and prepare to delve deeper into the aftermath of Akhenaten's ambitious, and sometimes bewildering, reign. As Akhenaten's ambitious reign unfolded like a soap opera set against the sunlit dunes of Amarna, the pharaoh wasn't just rewriting the rulebook of Egyptian religion. He was also redefining what it meant to be a royal family. Enter Nefertiti, his queen, who, much like a desert rose, was both captivating and formidable. In a world where the names and faces of Egyptian queens often faded into the limestone walls of history, Nefertiti stood out with the allure of a celebrity who knew how to work both the crowd and the power dynamics at play. Nefertiti and Akhenaten were a power couple of mythic proportions, capturing the ancient imagination with their extravagant displays of affection and their shared vision for a monotheistic Egypt. Their relationship wasn't just a marriage. It was a public spectacle, a collaborative venture that would have made even the most seasoned Hollywood PR agent nod in approval. Together, they had 6 daughters: Meritaten, Meketaten, Anchisemparten, Neferneferuaten Tasherit, Neferneferia, and Seripena, each named with a mouthful of syllables that could rival the titles of modern-day royalty. In their family portraits, which adorned the walls of Amarna, we see something astonishingly relatable. The first family of Egypt depicted not as distant deities, but as intimate, affectionate human beings. The art style was revolutionary, showing the pharaoh and his queen in tender moments with their children, a far cry from the rigid postures and stoic expressions of their predecessors. Picture a royal Instagram feed filled with candid shots of Akhenaten and Nefertiti doting on their children, a stark contrast to the solemn hieroglyphics that came before. The art was groundbreaking, not just in style, but in its message. This was a family that ruled together, lived together, and worshipped together under the sun-drenched gaze of Aten. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. Beneath the surface of this sunlit utopia, there were cracks in the foundation. The move of the capital to Akhenaten didn't just strain the economy. It also put the royal family under a microscope. Nefertiti wasn't just a pretty face. She was a political powerhouse, often depicted wearing the crown of co-regency, a signal that she wielded significant influence. Her role in Akhenaten's new religious order was crucial, suggesting that she was more than just a supportive spouse. She was a co-architect of their Aten-worshipping vision. Some historians suggest that Nefertiti may have even ruled as pharaoh after Akhenaten's death, possibly under the name Neferneferuiten, a theory that continues to spark debates as fiery as the Egyptian sun. Regardless, her presence in the annals of history is as undeniable as it is enigmatic. While she and her daughters were celebrated in art, the reality of life in Amarna was far from idyllic. The rapid construction of the city meant that many of its buildings were made hastily, sometimes with mud brick instead of the more durable stone, raising questions about the sustainability of Akhenaten's grand plans. Meanwhile, the dynamics within the royal family were as complex as the hieroglyphs that chronicled their lives. Meritaten, the eldest daughter, was groomed for power, often appearing alongside her parents in official ceremonies. Her role was not just ceremonial. She was a key player in the religious and political theater of Amarna, a potential heir in a world where succession was anything but straightforward. The daughters were not mere spectators. They were active participants in their father's religious revolution, their identities intertwined with the fate of Aten's worship. Yet, like any high-profile family, the Amarna royals weren't immune to tragedy. Meketaten, the second daughter, died young, her passing marked by poignant scenes of mourning etched into the walls of her tomb. Her death was a reminder that even under the sun-drenched optimism of Akhenaten, life was as fragile as a papyrus scroll caught in a desert breeze. The personal losses faced by Akhenaten and Nefertiti were compounded by the pressures of leading a nation in the throes of spiritual overhaul. As much as their domestic life seemed to mirror their revolutionary ambitions, it also revealed the human cost of Akhenaten's grand experiment. Behind the sunlit facades and familial displays of unity, there were signs of strain, social, economic, and personal. The more Akhenaten focused on his divine vision, the more he risked losing touch with the realities of ruling a kingdom with its own needs and traditions. His single-minded devotion to Aten was a double-edged sword, illuminating a new path while casting long shadows over the old ways. In essence, Akhenaten's family was as much a part of his religious revolution as the temples and art that defined his reign. They were his partners, his muses, and sometimes his political pawns. Together, they formed a dynasty that was both the symbol and the substance of his sun-drenched dream, a dream that, like all dreams, was ephemeral, destined to fade with the setting sun. But for that brief, incandescent moment in history, they were the luminaries of a radical new world, shining brightly against the backdrop of Egypt's ancient sands. As we leave Akhenaten and his family basking in Aten's glow, we'll soon turn our gaze to the consequences of their ambitious vision. Because, as any historian or savvy Instagram influencer will tell you, the brighter the spotlight, the darker the shadows it casts. Stay tuned as we uncover the fallout from Akhenaten's radical reign and the legacy it left on the sands of time. As the sun set on Akhenaten's reign, the cracks in his Aten-worshipping utopia began to widen, revealing more than just architectural flaws. Picture Egypt as a grand banquet, with Akhenaten as the host who spent so much time perfecting the lighting that he forgot to prepare the main course. And as anyone who's ever hosted knows, the guests, in this case, the traditional powers of Egypt, were getting restless and hungry for a return to the old feast, complete with all the gods they'd come to know and love. By the twilight of Akhenaten's reign around 1336 BCE, the economic strain of his religious revolution was no longer just a whisper among disgruntled ex-priests. It was a full-blown chorus of dissatisfaction. Building Akhenaten had been like maxing out the kingdom's credit card on a shiny new toy while ignoring the looming bills of governance. The treasury, already stretched thin from the capital's construction, was now gasping for breath, struggling to fund a kingdom that had been shaken but not stirred by Akhenaten's solitary focus on Aten. Trade, the lifeblood of Egypt's economy, was more erratic than a Nile flood chart. The attention once lavished on maintaining international relationships had been diverted to Akhenaten's theological pursuits. Meanwhile, Egypt's traditional allies and trading partners probably felt like they were on the receiving end of a royal ghosting. "Hello, it's us, your trade partners. Remember, The kingdom's neglect of foreign diplomacy was like leaving your phone on silent during a group chat about an upcoming reunion, a surefire way to miss important messages and invitations. As the pharaoh's health declined, so too did the kingdom's stability. Akhenaten's physical decline mirrored the political instability brewing like a cauldron of ancient chaos. It was a time when the stakes were as high as the pyramids and just as precarious. With Akhenaten's laser focus on religious reform, the military and bureaucratic infrastructure that held Egypt's empire together began to fray at the edges. The generals and scribes who once wielded power with the precision of a master painter's brush found themselves in a world that felt more like a finger-painting session gone awry. As if on cue, Egypt's traditional powers, the high priests, military leaders, and influential families, were circling like vultures with a keen eye on the throne. The priests of Ammon, relegated to the sidelines and stripped of their former glory, were itching to restore the old order. They were like a band of seasoned rock musicians waiting to reclaim the stage from a one-hit wonder who had overstayed his welcome. Their resentment simmered beneath the surface, a slow burn that threatened to ignite at the first flicker of opportunity. Social unrest bubbled up alongside this political tension. The people of Egypt, once dazzled by the promise of a new dawn, were now grappling with the harsh realities of Akhenaten's grand experiment. The relocation to Akhenaten, initially seen as a chance to start fresh, was increasingly viewed as an exile to a city that couldn't quite shake its status as a glorified construction site. The laborers who had built this city of sun were now left to wonder if their sacrifices had been in vain. The dissatisfaction wasn't just at the grassroots level. Within the royal court, whispers of discontent echoed through the palace halls. Akhenaten's focus on Aten had created a power vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum almost as much as Egyptian politics did. Those who had once been close allies of the pharaoh now found themselves questioning the sustainability of a regime that seemed more interested in celestial matters than earthly ones. There was an irony here that was hard to miss. Akhenaten, the pharaoh who had sought to unify Egypt under one guard, had inadvertently sown the seeds of division. His single-minded devotion to Aten was both his strength and his Achilles' heel. It unified his followers, but alienated those who clung to the old ways. It was a reminder that in the Game of Thrones, the rules change as quickly as the players, and loyalty is as fickle as the Nile's annual flood. As Akhenaten's health waned, speculation about his successor began to swirl. The question of succession was more complex than a hieroglyphic crossword puzzle. Akhenaten's daughters, particularly Meritaten, were in the spotlight, but the absence of a clear male heir complicated matters. Some suggest that Nefertiti might have stepped forward, taking on a more prominent leadership role, further muddling the line of succession. Her influence was undeniable, but whether she could hold the throne in a male-dominated society was a question as old as the pyramids themselves. With the pharaoh's grip on the throne loosening, the stage was set for a dramatic end to his revolutionary reign. The vultures were circling not just out of hunger, but out of necessity. Akhenaten's vision of a monotheistic Egypt was unraveling, his sunlit dream fading like a mirage in the desert heat. The reality of his reign was starkly clear. You couldn't simply erase millennia of tradition with the stroke of a royal edict, no matter how grand the vision or how bright the sun. As we look to the horizon, the consequences of Akhenaten's radical choices were poised to unfold like the next act in an epic drama. The sun might have set on his reign, but the story of Egypt's religious and political evolution was far from over. The traditional powers, the social unrest, and the looming question of succession were all pieces of a complex puzzle that would shape the next chapter in Egypt's storied history. But for now, let's leave Akhenaten in the twilight of his reign, a pharaoh who dared to dream big and left a legacy as enigmatic as the desert sands. As Akhenaten's reign flickered out like a candle in the desert wind, Egypt was ready to hit the undo button on what many saw as a disastrous chapter in its illustrious history. Picture the scene. The pharaoh's body barely cold in the tomb, and the old guard already dusting off the cobwebs from the statues of Ammon and the gang. It was as if the Aten worship had been a collective fever dream, a temporary madness from which the nation awoke with a hangover and a desperate need for the comfort of the familiar. The return to polytheism was as swift as a Nile crocodile snapping its jaws. Just like that, it was back to business as usual in the land of the pharaohs. Temples dedicated to Aten were hastily repurposed or abandoned, their sun-baked walls echoing with the whispered promises of a monotheistic utopia that never quite materialized. The priests of Ammon, who had been sidelined during Akhenaten's sun-worshipping escapades, returned with the zeal of rock stars, making a triumphant comeback tour. They dusted off their ceremonial garb, reignited the incense, and got back to the divine multitasking that had sustained Egypt for centuries. Akhenaten's successor, a boy king named Tutankhaten, quickly realized that riding the Aten wave was about as popular as a sandstorm at a beach party. In a political about-face that would make any modern spin doctor proud, he changed his name to Tutankhamun and set about restoring the old religious order. The temples of Ammon were refurbished, the statues repaired, and the old gods reinstated to their rightful places in the Egyptian pantheon. It was a PR campaign that even the most skeptical of Egyptologists would have to admire. The erasure of Akhenaten's memory was as thorough as it was brutal. The official line was clear. Akhenaten who? The state-sponsored amnesia was nothing short of a purge, with his name and images systematically chiseled off monuments across the land. In the annals of history, it was akin to Egypt hitting Control-Alt-Delete on the Aten experiment. His city of Akhenaten was left to crumble under the relentless desert sun, a ghost town that whispered of a dream that dared to defy the gods. But why did Akhenaten's reign matter, aside from being a blip on the radar of Egypt's storied past? For one, it serves as a classic cautionary tale about the perils of radical change. Akhenaten's attempt to reshape a civilization with the zeal of a visionary who forgot to read the room is a reminder of the delicate balance between innovation and tradition. When you try to turn a society on its head, don't be surprised if it lands back on its feet with a vengeance. Economically, the Aten experiment was a costly detour. The construction of Akhenaten and the reallocation of resources left Egypt's coffers as depleted as a sand dune after a windstorm. The disruption in trade and the neglect of foreign relations created ripples that took years to stabilize. Akhenaten's reign was a masterclass in how not to manage an economy, a lesson in the importance of keeping one's eyes on both the sun and the ground beneath one's feet. Socially, the return to the old gods was a relief for a populace that had been dragged along on a spiritual journey few had asked for. The restoration of traditional religious practices provided a sense of stability and continuity, a reminder that some things, like the Nile's annual floods, were best left unchanged. The people of Egypt, who had once been asked to worship a singular sun disk, were now free to return to their familiar pantheon, a diverse assembly of deities that reflected the complexity of their world. Politically, Akhenaten's reign and its aftermath highlighted the enduring power of Egypt's religious institutions. The priests of Ammon, once cast aside, proved that they were not just spiritual leaders, but political forces to be reckoned with. Their ability to reclaim their influence and restore the old order underscored the symbiotic relationship between religion and politics that defined ancient Egypt. And what of Akhenaten himself? In the grand tapestry of history, he remains a figure as enigmatic as the Sphinx, a pharaoh who dared to dream of a different world, but whose legacy was swept away like desert sand. Yet, buried beneath the rubble of his sunlit city, his story continues to captivate the imaginations of historians and laypeople alike. Akhenaten's reign, with all its flaws and ambitions, serves as a reminder that history is as much about those who dared to dream as it is about those who succeeded. In the end, Akhenaten's legacy, or lack thereof, is a testament to the resilience of tradition in the face of radical change. His story is one of bold visions and harsh realities, of a pharaoh who sought to rewrite the rules of his world, but whose chapter was ultimately erased by the sands of time. As the sun set on his reign and Egypt returned to its polytheistic roots, Akhenaten's dream faded into legend, a cautionary tale of hubris, ambition, and the enduring power of the gods. Pericles was born into a world where the gods had serious PR issues, and democracy was the new kid on the block just trying to find its way. Around 495 BC, Athens was a city-state that was less concerned with personal liberty and more fixated on if their rival, Sparta, was going to crash the party again. Now, in this ancient soap opera, enter baby Pericles. Athenian by birth, but destined to be the bay and say of politics. This guy had it all: money, brains, and a nose that could probably detect political scandal from a mile away. Seriously, his nickname was Squillhead, because his noggin was, well, uniquely shaped. But hey, in a world where people believed in half-man, half-bull creatures, a funny-shaped head was the least of anyone's problems. Pericles grew up in a household where education was not just encouraged, it was practically a family business. His father, Xanthippus, was a notable politician and military man, famous for kicking the Persian army to the curb at the Battle of Mycale in 479 BC. Meanwhile, his mother, Agariste, came from the Alcmeonid family, a clan with more political intrigue than a Netflix series. So, young Pericles was basically a walking power couple before he even knew his alphabets. As a teen, Pericles had a front-row seat to the intellectual fireworks of Athens. He was educated by philosophers like Anaxagoras, who taught him that the sun wasn't a god riding a flaming chariot, but a massive, fiery rock. No wonder Pericles grew up to be a skeptic with a penchant for questioning everything. Think of it as the ancient Greek version of don't believe everything you read on the internet. Fast forward to Pericles stepping into the political arena, and the situation was as chaotic as a toga party gone wrong. Athens was a bustling metropolis of about 250,000 people, including slaves and non-citizens called medics, who were vital to the economy but couldn't vote. The political landscape was a gladiator match, with aristocrats battling for influence like it was some early version of Survivor, Athens edition. Pericles had to navigate this with the dexterity of a seasoned politician, which he did, armed with charm, intellect, and probably a map to avoid the numerous political landmines. But Athens wasn't just a city of philosophers and playwrights. Oh no, it was also a place where political alliances were as fleeting as a Greek summer breeze. Pericles, playing the long game, knew that staying in power required not just skill, but also strategic alliances. Enter Aspasia, his partner in life and love, who was not your typical Athenian woman. Aspasia was a medic from Miletus, and she had more wit and wisdom than many of the men who dominated the political scene. Their relationship was considered scandalous, but Aspasia was Pericles' intellectual equal, and together they were like the brain Jelena of ancient Greece, minus the tabloids, of course. However, keeping political influence in Athens wasn't a simple matter of making good speeches and having a powerful partner. It required cold, hard cash. Athens ran on a currency of silver drachmas, and maintaining influence meant funding public projects and throwing some epic parties. Pericles understood that the key to winning hearts was not just a sharp tongue, but also a generous purse. He famously initiated the construction of the Parthenon, a colossal undertaking that cost around 469 silver talents, or in modern terms, a small fortune. But hey, when you're trying to impress the guards and your constituents, you spare no expense. The political arena of Athens was rife with drama that would put any reality TV show to shame. Politicians were not above mudslinging, bribery, or outright betrayal. Pericles had his share of rivals who wanted to see him fail, and probably trip on his toga for good measure. Yet, he managed to outmaneuver them with a combination of strategic brilliance and a dash of good old-fashioned luck. His oratory skills were legendary, leaving his audiences both spellbound and slightly confused about what just happened. But that's politics for you. Pericles' early political career was marked by a shrewd understanding of the power dynamics at play. He aligned himself with the democratic faction, which sought to increase the power of the people, or at least the male citizens who could vote. His political strategy was to expand the franchise, reduce the power of the aristocracy, and bring in reforms that would lead to what we now call radical democracy. It was a bold move that would define his legacy and reshape the political landscape of Athens for generations. So, here we have Pericles, an enigmatic figure, a leader with the brains of a philosopher and the heart of a warrior. He rose to power not by fluke, but through a combination of intellectual prowess, strategic alliances, and a touch of that Athenian bravado. His story is a testament to the fact that history isn't always written by the victors. Sometimes it's penned by those who dared to dream big, even if it meant rocking the boat, or in this case, the trireme. And speaking of rocking the trireme, let's set sail to the construction of the Parthenon, Pericles' piece de résistance. Picture the scene. Athens, 447 BC. The city's skyline was about to get a major upgrade, not with luxury condos, but with a temple that would become the Acropolis' crown jewel. Pericles, ever the visionary, envisioned the Parthenon not just as a religious sanctuary, but as a symbol of Athenian supremacy, like erecting a giant, we're number one, foam finger in marble and gold. The Parthenon was a massive undertaking, and we aren't just talking about the sheer size of its 5 by 30, 9-meter footprint. This was no DIY weekend project. Pericles conscripted the best talent around, including the master sculptor Phidias, who was like the Michelangelo of his day, minus the Ninja Turtles. The cost soared to around 469 silver talents, roughly equivalent to several $1 million today. And if you're wondering how Athens footed this astronomical bill, well, let's just say they raided the piggy bank of the Delian League, a coalition of Greek city-states that had pooled resources for defense, not decorative columns. But hey, who could resist a little creative accounting when you're building history? In true ancient Greek fashion, the Parthenon wasn't just built, it was crafted. Every column, every sculpture was a testament to precision and artistry. The Athenians even used optical illusions to make sure the lines appeared straight to the human eye, a level of detail that would make a modern architect weep with envy or confusion. But like any good construction project, delays were inevitable. "Sorry, the marble shipment is stuck at sea," is a phrase that probably echoed through the agora more than once. In today's terms, think of it as the ancient equivalent of waiting for your contractor to finally finish your kitchen remodel. Naturally, such a grandiose project wasn't without its critics. Some Athenians saw the Parthenon as an extravagant expenditure in a city already strained by war and political tension. The cynics might have asked, do we really need another temple when our navy's ships are looking a bit shabby? But Pericles, ever the political maestro, knew that the Parthenon was more than just a building. It was a statement, a marble-clad middle finger to Athens' rivals, and a beacon of cultural pride. Economically, the Parthenon was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it provided employment for scores of artisans, laborers, and craftsmen, injecting much-needed drachmas into the local economy. On the other hand, it was a financial gamble, one that put a significant strain on Athens' coffers. The project was a bit like throwing a lavish wedding when you're not quite sure you can make rent next month, bold, daring, and just a tad irresponsible. Socially, the project demonstrated how public works could be used as a tool for political leverage. Pericles understood that a happy populace was less likely to revolt, and what better way to keep the masses content than with a spectacular new temple? It was a masterstroke of political theater, drawing attention away from the less savory aspects of his governance, like the fact that real democracy was still a distant dream for women, slaves, and medics. Politically, Pericles used the Parthenon to cement his legacy. It was a physical manifestation of his vision for Athens as the cultural and intellectual hub of the Greek world. The Parthenon, with its imposing statues and intricate friezes, was a visual narrative of Athenian greatness. It was like having your biography written in stone and displayed for all to see, ensuring that your name wouldn't just fade into the sands of time. The Parthenon project was a testament to Pericles' ability to blend ambition with pragmatism. He had the foresight to invest in cultural capital, recognizing that art and architecture could wield as much power as the sharpest spear. This wasn't just about beautifying the city. It was about creating a legacy that would outlast the fleeting whims of political fortune. In the grand tapestry of history, Pericles wasn't merely weaving a city. He was stitching the very fabric of Western civilization. However, it's worth noting that the Parthenon's grandeur was built on the backs of those who would never see inside its hallowed halls. The laborers, many of whom were slaves or lower-class citizens, toiled under the hot Athenian sun for little recognition. It's the age-old story of monumental achievement funded by the sweat of the many for the glory of the few. Sure, the Parthenon was a marvel, but it also served as a reminder that history is often penned by those at the top, while the silent contributions of the masses lay buried beneath its foundations. In the end, the Parthenon was more than just a temple. It was Pericles' magnum opus. It stood as a testament to his vision of Athens and his ability to transform ideals into reality, one marble block at a time. But like all things in life, It was a double-edged sword, a dazzling achievement that came at a cost, both economically and socially. As Pericles would soon discover, building an empire is easy compared to maintaining it. But more on that in the next installment, where we'll dive deeper into the political intrigue and challenges that define the latter part of his career. Stay tuned, history buffs, because the drama of ancient Greece is far from over. As Pericles stood admiring the Parthenon's gleaming marble columns, he knew that Athens' real strength lay not just in its artful architecture, but in its strategic prowess on the Mediterranean chessboard. Enter the Delian League, founded in 478 BC, one of history's most ambitious alliances, or perhaps an ancient version of a protection racket, depending on whom you ask. Initially created to fend off Persian threats, it morphed into Athens' imperial piggy bank. Picture this: a coalition of Greek city-states pooling resources for mutual defense, with Athens holding the purse strings. How noble, right? Not exactly. This league was more like a subscription service that you couldn't cancel. Member states contributed ships or money, but by the time Pericles took the helm, the league's treasury had relocated from Delos to Athens, turning it into a shiny ATM for Athenian projects. You could almost hear the cash register ding every time Pericles had a new public work in mind. But hey, if you can't beat M, tax M. Pericles was a master of political spin, presenting the League as a noble pursuit of freedom for all Greeks. Yet, in reality, it was more about the freedom to bolster Athens' naval dominance. Imagine telling your neighbors you're forming a neighborhood watch, only to demand they fund your backyard swimming pool, or in this case, a fleet of triremes. Pericles' Athenian imperialism was as much about maintaining power as it was about protecting it. And then came the Peloponnesian War in 431 BC, the ancient Greek equivalent of a slow-motion train wreck that everyone saw coming but couldn't stop. This was Sparta versus Athens, a clash of the titans with a supporting cast of other Greek city-states. If you think modern geopolitics is messy, buckle up, because ancient Greece had more backstabbing and betrayals than a Shakespearean drama. Pericles, the strategic genius he was, had a plan, or as some might say, a grand gamble. His strategy was to leverage Athens' naval superiority and avoid land battles with the fearsome Spartan hoplites. Sounds smart enough, right? Well, it was also a bit like trying to win a fistfight by running laps around your opponent. But this wasn't just about playing to Athens' strengths. It was about drawing out the war to sap Sparta's resources and resolve. Basically, Pericles was banking on the Spartans getting so tired of the whole affair that they just pack up their spears and go home. To sell this strategy to the Athenian people, Pericles had to do some serious PR work. War is expensive, after all, and Pericles spun the narrative like a seasoned politician. He painted the conflict as a noble defense of Athenian democracy. A tough sell when your democracy is more like an exclusive club. The costs were staggering, with estimates suggesting war expenses reached upwards of 2,000 talents a year. That's ancient Greek for a whole lot of drachmas. Yet, Pericles had a knack for rallying public opinion, using his famed oratory to inspire and convince. He was the ancient world's equivalent of a motivational speaker, sans the PowerPoint slides. His speeches were like verbal fireworks, lighting up the Athenian assembly with a mix of patriotism and pragmatism. He argued that the sacrifices were necessary to protect Athenian values and the empire's prosperity. A bit rich, considering those values didn't extend to the enslaved or medics. But hey, politics has never been the realm of consistency. However, Pericles' grand strategy came with unintended consequences. While Athens was busy playing naval chess, Sparta decided to take a more direct approach, marching onto Athenian land and burning crops like they were trying to win an arsonist's award. This forced Athenians behind their city walls, resulting in the overcrowding that led to a devastating plague. Some historians estimate that the plague wiped out a third of Athens' population, including Pericles himself in 429 BC. Talk about irony. Pericles, the architect of Athenian strategy, fell not by an enemy's spear, but by microscopic invaders. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Even as the war raged on, Athens clung to its imperial ambitions. The narrative of freedom for all continued to be a hard sell when the reality was more about subjugation than liberation. Under Pericles, the Athenian Empire expanded its influence, using the Delian leagues might to enforce its will. It was less about spreading democracy and more about ensuring that Athens stayed top dog in the Greek world. The reality was that Athens' empire was built on the backs of its allies, who often found themselves more subjugated than supported. This imperial ambition came with its own set of challenges. Athens had to constantly balance diplomacy with domination, a tightrope walk that would make even the most seasoned diplomat break a sweat. The city-states under Athenian control weren't always thrilled to be part of this empire-building exercise, and revolts were as common as philosophical debates in the agora. In the end, Pericles' military strategies and foreign policies were a mix of brilliance and hubris. His vision of Athens as a beacon of civilization was both inspiring and flawed, a shining example of how even the best-laid plans can unravel under the weight of reality. Pericles wanted Athens to be the cultural and intellectual hub of the Greek world, but he also couldn't resist the allure of empire, with all its seductive promises and perilous pitfalls. The Peloponnesian War and the Delian League were testament to Pericles' complex legacy, a leader who dared to dream of greatness, yet whose ambitions often outpaced the realities of the world he sought to shape. It was a time of monumental achievements and equally monumental missteps, a reminder that history is often a tale of contradictions wrapped up in the grand narrative of human endeavor. So, as we leave Pericles' story hanging on the precipice of Athenian imperialism and the chaos of war, one thing remains clear. The drama of ancient Greece isn't just about gods and heroes, but the very human struggle for power, identity, and survival. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the tumultuous aftermath of Pericles' reign and the lessons that echo through the ages. The saga of Athens is far from over, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Athens, a city where the drama wasn't just confined to the stage, but spilled out into every corner of life, under Pericles' watchful eye. This was a time when Athens wasn't just the city of democracy. It was the Hollywood of the ancient world, minus the red carpets, but with plenty of sandals. So, how did Pericles transform Athens into the cultural powerhouse that makes your high school history teacher swoon over Greek tragedies? It wasn't just luck. It was a calculated move to make Athens the brainchild of an intellectual explosion. You see, Pericles had a vision. He wanted Athens to be the intellectual and cultural hub of the Greek world, a place where you couldn't throw a stone without hitting a philosopher or a playwright. And boy, did he succeed. The guy was like the ultimate art patron, a one-man Kickstarter campaign for creativity. He supported the arts like they were his personal Netflix subscription, funding public works, festivals, and performances that left Athenians both in awe and in debt. Let's start with the Dionysia, an annual festival dedicated to Dionysus, the god of wine and drama, because what goes better with tragedy than a hearty glass of vino? Pericles pumped resources into this festival like it was the original Coachella, and it became a platform for playwrights to showcase their talents. Enter Sophocles, the Shakespeare of his day, minus the iambic pentameter. His plays, like Oedipus Rex, weren't just entertainment. They were cultural events that addressed morality, fate, and the human condition with the subtlety of a Greek chorus. Sophocles was a celebrity before the term existed, with a fan base that would rival any modern influencer. And let's not forget the historians, like Herodotus, who was basically the TMZ of ancient Greece, chronicling wars and cultures with an eye for the dramatic. He was the first to attempt a systematic collection of events, and is often called the father of history. But his accounts were less about cold, hard facts, and more about storytelling, blending myth and reality like a seasoned novelist. His work was a hit in Athens, where people were hungry for tales of distant lands and heroic deeds. Pericles understood the power of these narratives, supporting intellectuals who would weave Athens into the fabric of history. But here's the kicker. How much of this was Pericles' genius, and how much was simply the natural evolution of Athenian society? Sure, Pericles was a catalyst, but the fertile ground for such a cultural revolution was already there. Athens was a melting pot of ideas, thanks to its bustling trade routes and cosmopolitan population. The city was primed for an intellectual explosion, with or without Pericles. He might have been the conductor, but the orchestra was ready to play. Economically, this cultural investment wasn't just a vanity project. It was a strategic move to boost Athens' prestige and attract talent from all over Greece. The city became a beacon for thinkers and artists, all drawn to its vibrant intellectual life. The money spent on theaters and festivals created jobs, while the influx of visitors spurred the local economy. It was a win-win, assuming you weren't one of the taxpayers footing the bill. Socially, Pericles' Athens was a paradox. While it celebrated intellectual freedom and artistic expression, it was also a society where only a fraction of the population could participate in democracy. Women, slaves, and medics were largely excluded from this cultural renaissance. The glittering facade of Athenian culture masked the inequalities that lay beneath, a reminder that even in a city of enlightenment, shadows lingered in the corners. Politically, Pericles knew that a populace engaged in cultural pursuits was less likely to question their leaders. The arts served as both a distraction and a unifying force, creating a shared identity that transcended social divisions. It was a calculated move to maintain stability and control, proving once again that in Athens, as in life, things were rarely as simple as they seemed. Now, let's talk about the celebrity culture that emerged in Athens during this time. Think of Sophocles and Herodotus as the A-listers of their day, with fan clubs and rivalries that would put modern tabloids to shame. Their works were discussed in the agora like the latest box office hits, and their opinions were sought after like endorsements. This was a time when intellectual prowess was as celebrated as military might, turning scholars into stars. But here's the rub. How much of this was due to Pericles, and how much was simply the zeitgeist of the era? It's easy to credit Pericles for Athens' cultural golden age, but it's also likely that Athens was destined for greatness, with or without him. The city was a crucible of ideas, where philosophers debated the nature of reality, while artists explored the depths of human emotion. Pericles may have been the maestro, but the symphony was already in motion. Yet, let's not downplay Pericles' role entirely. His support for the arts and drama was pivotal in shaping Athens' cultural identity and cementing its place in history. He was a visionary who understood the power of culture to transform a society, even if his motivations weren't entirely altruistic. Pericles' legacy is a testament to the enduring impact of art and intellect, a reminder that while empires may crumble, ideas endure. So, as we wrap up this look at Pericles and the cultural revolution of Athens, remember this. History is a tapestry woven from threads of ambition, opportunity, and chance. Pericles was a master weaver, but he wasn't working alone. The cultural explosion of Athens was the result of countless forces converging at the right time, creating a legacy that still resonates today. And while we may question how much credit Pericles truly deserves, one thing is certain. His story is one of ambition, creativity, and the undeniable power of human endeavor. Stay tuned for more, because the saga of Athens is far from over. And so here we stand, gazing at the Athenian skyline, a city that once buzzed with the relentless energy of philosophers, playwrights, and politicians, all of whom owed a nod, or at least a reluctant acknowledgement, to Pericles. But as with all great stories, the tale of Pericles is as much about the fall as it is about the rise. Our political maestro wasn't immune to the same fate that befalls all who fly too close to the sun, even if they do so on ships instead of wings. By the time 429 BC rolled around, Pericles' influence was waning faster than a Greek sunset. The Peloponnesian War was dragging on, and the Athenian strategy of naval superiority was starting to feel more like a desperate act of treading water. You see, the Spartan strategy was simple. Keep hitting the Athenians where it hurt, their land. And while Pericles had Athens playing the long game, the Athenians themselves were growing weary of the endless cycle of conflict, plague, and political tension that had descended like a thick Athenian fog. And let's not gloss over the plague. Oh no, this wasn't your average case of the sniffles. The plague of Athens, which struck in 430 BC, was a game-changer, claiming the lives of perhaps a third of the city's population, including Pericles' own family. Imagine the grim specter of death stalking the streets, sparing neither the rich nor the influential. The irony. Pericles, the great strategist, was felled not by Spartan spears, but by an unseen enemy, a microscopic conqueror that couldn't be swayed by oratory or strategy. This epidemic not only decimated the population, but also eroded Pericles' political capital. With the city in turmoil, his once unshakable grip on power began to falter. The Athens that had once rallied behind him was now questioning his leadership, like an audience booing a once-beloved actor who missed his cue. They were tired, they were angry, and they were looking for someone to blame. Pericles might have been a master of political theatre, but even he couldn't script a comeback from a disaster of this magnitude. By the time Pericles succumbed to the plague in 429 BC, his political power had already diminished significantly. His death marked the end of an era, a moment when Athens had to reckon with the legacy of a leader who had shaped its destiny with both brilliance and blind spots. His was a legacy built on both democratic ideals and imperial ambitions, a paradox wrapped in a toga of contradictions. Let's take a step back and consider Pericles' legacy. He's often hailed as the father of democracy, but let's be real. His democracy was more like a members-only club than a true embodiment of power to the people. Women, slaves, and medics, those non-Athenian residents who kept the economy humming, were relegated to the sidelines, their voices absent from the democratic chorus. Sure, Pericles expanded the franchise for male citizens, but that's a bit like giving everyone a slice of cake at a party where only certain guests are invited. Yet, we can't ignore the romantic allure of Pericles' Athens, a city that became the cultural and intellectual heartbeat of the ancient world. Under his watch, Athens blossomed into a hub of creativity and thought, producing works that would echo through the annals of history. The Parthenon, the dramas of Sophocles, the histories of Herodotus, all part of a cultural legacy that still captivates us today. It's the stuff of legend, the kind of narrative that makes history books read like epic tales, even if the truth was messier and steeped in complexity. So, was Pericles a visionary leader or a master manipulator? The answer, as always, lies somewhere in between. He was a politician who understood the art of persuasion and the power of public works, using both to maintain his grip on power. Yet, he was also a man who dared to envision a city that could be a beacon of democracy and culture, even if his vision was flawed and incomplete. Pericles was a man of his time, constrained by the social and political realities of the ancient world, but also a man who pushed those boundaries in ways that continue to resonate. In the end, Pericles' story is a reminder that history is never as simple as heroes and villains. It's a tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, power, and human endeavor, where the best intentions can lead to unintended consequences, and where the pursuit of greatness can come at a great cost. As we reflect on his legacy, we see a leader who was both a champion of his people and a product of his era, a figure whose life and work invite us to question the myths we hold dear and the narratives we construct. Pericles' Athens was a city of contrasts, a society that reached for the stars even as it grappled with the shadows. It was a place where democracy and imperialism danced a delicate tango, where art and intellect flourished against a backdrop of inequality and war. It's a story that's as relevant today as it was 2.5 millennia ago, testament to the enduring complexity of human nature and the relentless pursuit of progress. And as we close this chapter on Pericles, let's remember that history is not just a collection of dates and events, but a living dialogue between past and present. It's a conversation that invites us to learn from the triumphs and mistakes of those who came before, to seek out the truths that lie beneath the surface, and to recognize that the stories we tell shape the world we live. So here's to Pericles, a man who dared to dream big, whose legacy is a mosaic of contradictions, and whose story reminds us that the path to greatness is rarely a straight line. As we turn the page on his era, let's carry forward the lessons of his life, with all its triumphs and complexities, into our own world, where the echoes of ancient Greece still resonate in the halls of democracy and the corridors of power. Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, was never destined for greatness. In fact, if you were a Tudor-era bookie, you might have given better odds on a horse winning a chess match than Elizabeth sitting on the throne. But alas, the Tudor family was no stranger to plot twists, and Elizabeth was no ordinary player in their game. She was the wild card, the Queen of Hearts in a deck stacked with ambition, betrayal, and a little bit of head-larping drama. Born on September 7, 1533, Elizabeth's early life was like a soap opera with royal bling. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, was the second wife of King Henry Roman VIII, a man whose marital turnover rate was rivaled only by the number of times he switched religious loyalties. Anne's marriage to Henry was supposed to change the world, and it did, just not in the way she hoped. By the time Elizabeth was 2, Anne was executed for charges so trumped up they might as well have come with a side of fries. Elizabeth went from princess to bastard faster than you could say, off with her head. But Elizabeth was no shrinking violet. Growing up in the shadow of her infamous father and the revolving door of stepmothers, 6, for those keeping count, she learned that survival in the Tudor court required more than just a good poker face. It demanded a full deck of strategic brilliance. Her education was top-notch, thanks to the tutors who taught her languages, philosophy, and crucially, how to navigate the cutthroat world of Tudor politics. By her teens, Elizabeth could speak several languages fluently, including Latin, French, and Italian, making her a polyglot powerhouse ready to outsmart any courtier who dared cross her path. Yet, her early years were not all about dodging the political axe. There was a fair bit of religious turmoil to spice things up. The Reformation was the medieval version of a global rebranding campaign, and Henry's break from the Catholic Church was the Tudor family's contribution to the chaos. England swung between Catholicism and Protestantism like a pendulum with a caffeine addiction. By the time Henry's short-lived heir Edward VI, Elizabeth's half-brother, took the throne, Protestantism was the flavor of the day, but the pendulum swung back with Mary I, Elizabeth's Catholic half-sister, whose reign was marked by a fiery zeal, literally given her penchant for burning Protestant dissenters at the stake. During Mary's reign, Elizabeth's life was a tightrope walk over a pit of alligators. Suspected of being involved in Protestant plots, she was thrown into the Tower of London. Talk about sibling rivalry. Imagine being grounded for something you didn't do, except instead of your room. It's a dank prison cell with a view of the executioner's block. Yet, Elizabeth kept her cool. She wrote letters pleading her innocence with such eloquence that it's a wonder she didn't charm the ravens off the tower walls. Mary eventually let Elizabeth go, but not without keeping her under a watchful eye. And then came the fateful year of 1558. Mary died without an heir, and the throne fell into Elizabeth's lap. It was a coronation that defied all odds. A Protestant queen ascending after a Catholic reign, in a country where religious tension could be cut with a knife. Elizabeth's ascension wasn't just a political shift. It was a seismic event that shook the foundations of English society. Elizabeth's early reign was a masterclass in political maneuvering. She understood the power dynamics at play and wielded her status as the Virgin Queen like a scalpel, cutting through the expectations of marriage that plagued every monarch. Her famous quote, "I will have here but one mistress, and no master," was not just a statement of independence, but a declaration of her intention to rule with absolute authority. Marriage proposals came and went like seasonal fashion trends, but Elizabeth remained steadfast in her refusal, opting instead for a lifelong commitment to her country. In the realm of politics and religion, Elizabeth's reign was a game of chess where every move was calculated and every piece had a role. She re-established Protestantism as the faith of the land, but did so with a pragmatism that avoided the extremes of her predecessors. The Elizabethan religious settlement of 1559 was a stroke of genius, a middle road between Catholicism and Protestantism that aimed to appease both sides enough to keep the peace. It was this blend of charm and cunning that characterized Elizabeth's approach, allowing her to navigate the treacherous waters of Tudor politics with a steady hand. So here we have her, Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, a monarch who turned the very notion of what it meant to be a ruler on its head. She was a woman leading in a man's world, a Protestant guiding a nation scarred by religious conflict, and a queen who chose her own path rather than follow the well-trodden one of marriage and subservience. Her early life was a crucible that forged the steel of her character, setting the stage for one of the most remarkable reigns in English history. And as we dive deeper into her story, one thing becomes clear. Elizabeth was not just a queen, she was a force of nature. Yet, despite all her grandeur and the formidable aura she projected, Elizabeth's reign was anything but a royal parade. It was a delicate balancing act, and she was the tightrope walker juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle. Her court was a buzzing hive of ambition, deceit, and testosterone-fueled politics. The fact that she managed to stay atop this precarious pyramid of power for 45 years is a testament to her political genius, and perhaps a dash of strategic madness. Elizabeth's realpolitik was a masterclass in the art of staying one step ahead. She had an uncanny ability to read the room, or rather, the entire kingdom, like a poker player with X-ray vision. Her refusal to marry wasn't just a personal quirk. It was a deliberate move in the chess game of power. By remaining single, she avoided entangling alliances that could turn England into a puppet state. She famously declared herself married to England, and while it sounds romantic, it was pure political pragmatism. She kept foreign suitors dangling like marionettes, playing them off against one another to England's advantage. Suitors like Philip II of Spain, who must have felt like a contestant on a never-ending season of Tudor Bachelor, were kept in a perpetual state of hope and frustration. And then there were her speeches. Shakespeare himself would have killed for her scriptwriters. Her words were like a finely honed rapier, cutting through the doubt and dissent. Take her famous speech to the troops at Tilbury in 1588, as the Spanish Armada loomed like a dark cloud on the horizon. Dressed in a suit of silver armor, she declared, "I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England, too." It's the kind of line that could make an entire army ready to storm the gates of hell, or at least take on the Spanish fleet. Speaking of the Spanish Armada, let's talk about that infamous showdown. In 1588, Philip II of Spain, incensed by Elizabeth's support of Protestant rebels in the Netherlands and her privateers plundering his treasure ships, decided to teach England a lesson. He launched a mighty fleet, the so-called Invincible Armada, consisting of 130 ships equipped with 431 cannons and over 30,000 men. It was the naval equivalent of bringing a bazooka to a knife fight. But Elizabeth, ever the cunning strategist, had other plans. She deployed her smaller, more maneuverable ships, captained by seasoned seafarers like Sir Francis Drake, to harry and outmaneuver the lumbering Spanish galleons. And then there was the weather, the ultimate wild card in any historical drama, and it turned out to be Elizabeth's secret weapon. A fierce storm, which the English would later call the Protestant wind, scattered the Spanish ships, transforming Philip's dream of conquest into a nautical nightmare. The Spanish Armada was defeated, marking a turning point in naval warfare and securing England's future as a maritime power. As Elizabeth's triumphant forces celebrated, Philip was left to ponder how it all went wrong, likely cursing the fickle English weather as much as the Queen herself. But let's not get carried away by the romance of victory. The reality was far from idyllic. The war with Spain drained England's coffers like a leaky bucket. By the end of Elizabeth's reign, the national debt had ballooned to over £350,000, a princely sum in those days. Moreover, the ongoing conflict wreaked havoc on trade, and many of Elizabeth's subjects were left feeling the pinch. Yet Elizabeth, with her uncanny knack for spin, managed to keep her popularity intact, portraying the victory over Spain as a divine endorsement of her rule. In this, she was aided by her mastery of image and propaganda. The portraits. Elizabeth understood the power of image long before Instagram influencers made it a daily obsession. Her portraits were meticulously crafted pieces of propaganda, designed to project an image of grandeur, stability, and divine right, qualities that were not always reflected in the messy reality of her reign. In these paintings, she appeared almost otherworldly, draped in luxurious fabrics, surrounded by symbols of power like globes, crowns, and pearls. Each portrait was a visual press release, reinforcing her status as England's unassailable virgin queen. And then there were the myths, the romantic exploits that have tantalized generations. Let's clear the air. Elizabeth was no swooning damsel waiting for a knight in shining armor. Sure, there were rumors of dalliances, particularly with her childhood friend and favorite, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. The gossip mills spun tales of secret trysts and whispered promises. Yet despite the allure of such stories, there's scant evidence to support them. Elizabeth was a master of flirtation and courtly love, using romance as another tool in her political arsenal. Her so-called affairs were more about keeping nobles in line and foreign suitors guessing than actual passion. Elizabeth's reign was not just a story of personal triumph, but also of national transformation. She presided over a period of immense change, steering England through a maze of political, religious, and economic challenges. Her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of Tudor politics while maintaining her grip on power was nothing short of extraordinary. As we continue to explore her legacy, it becomes clear that Elizabeth was not just a queen. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who played the Game of Thrones on her terms and left an indelible mark on history. The legend and the reality of her reign remain intertwined, forming a tapestry as rich and complex as the era she helped shape. Speaking of transformations, let's dive into the economic wizardry that Elizabeth worked on her realm. If her reign were a Stark, you'd be looking at a bullish market. Well, mostly. Elizabeth's economic policies were like a masterclass in fiscal flexibility, a skill as crucial then as it is today when managing a national purse that had more holes than a Tudor cheese grater. At the start of her reign, England's economy was a hot mess. National debt was soaring, and inflation was wreaking havoc faster than a Tudor banquet could empty a wine cellar. But Elizabeth, ever the shrewd manager, wasn't about to let the crown's coffers gather dust and cobwebs. She took a pragmatic approach, balancing taxation with trade and revitalizing industries that had been left to languish like forgotten relics. One of Elizabeth's first moves was to stabilize the currency. Sounds dull, right, but imagine trying to buy a loaf of bread with coins that fluctuated in value more than your favorite cryptocurrency. Elizabeth's solution was to call in the old, debased coins and issue new ones, restoring trust in the currency. It was a move that laid the groundwork for economic stability and growth, like giving the Tudor economy a fresh coat of financial paint. Next up, trade. The lifeblood of any prosperous nation. Elizabeth understood that England's future lay beyond its shores. She encouraged trade by granting charters to companies like the East India Company, founded in 1600. With this stroke of genius, she opened the doors to the lucrative markets of Asia, setting the stage for England's eventual rise as a global trading power. The company became a behemoth of commerce, a corporate leviathan that would eventually have its own private army. Talk about a hostile takeover. But trade wasn't just about spices and silks. Elizabeth revitalized the wool industry, which had been England's economic backbone since medieval times. By imposing tariffs on foreign textiles, she protected domestic producers, ensuring that English wool was the fabric of choice for fashion-conscious Europeans. It was a strategy that supported local economies while generating revenue for the crown, a win-win in the cutthroat world of Tudor economics. And then there were the pirates, privateers. Elizabeth's so-called sea dogs, like Sir Francis Drake, were more than just swashbuckling adventurers. They were state-sponsored entrepreneurs, licensed to plunder Spanish treasure ships under the guise of patriotism. It was a cheeky strategy that filled the royal coffers with Spanish gold, much to Philip Roman II's eternal chagrin. But let's not be too hasty in painting Elizabeth's economy as a golden age of prosperity. The reality for many of her subjects was far less glamorous. Poverty was rampant, with up to 30% of the population living at or below subsistence levels. Beggars roamed the streets, and the infamous Poor Laws of 1597 and 1601 were enacted to tackle the growing crisis. These laws were a mixed bag, providing relief for the deserving poor while punishing the idle poor with public whippings. It was a harsh reality that contrasted sharply with the polished image of the Elizabethan Golden Age. This brings us to the cultural renaissance that flourished under Elizabeth's patronage. If economics were her bread and butter, then the arts were the sumptuous feast she offered to her people. Elizabeth's court became a beacon for poets, playwrights, and artists, attracting talent like a magnet draws iron filings. She supported luminaries like William Shakespeare, whose plays captured the human condition with a brilliance that still dazzles us today. Shakespeare's works were more than just entertainment. They were a reflection of Elizabethan society, touching on themes of power, ambition, and identity. Under Elizabeth's reign, the Globe Theatre became a cultural icon, a place where the high and mighty mingled with the common folk, united by the magic of the stage. Shakespeare's Hamlet, Macbeth, and A Midsummer Night's Dream are just a few of the masterpieces that emerged during this time, each a testament to the creative spirit that Elizabeth nurtured. Yet, while the arts flourished, the streets of London told a different story. The city was a bustling metropolis, but it was also a breeding ground for disease. The bubonic plague was a frequent visitor, sweeping through the population with lethal efficiency. The 1592-1593 outbreak was particularly devastating, closing theaters and claiming thousands of lives. It was a grim reminder of the era's precariousness, a stark contrast to the sanitized glamour of Elizabethan pageantry. Elizabeth's reign was indeed a tapestry of contrasts, a time of cultural splendor and economic innovation set against a backdrop of social inequality and hardship. Her ability to navigate these complexities was nothing short of remarkable. She was a ruler who understood that the power of image and the reality of governance were two sides of the same coin, each essential to the survival and prosperity of her kingdom. As we continue to unravel her legacy, it's clear that Elizabeth was more than just the Virgin Queen. She was a savvy leader who left an indelible mark on history. Her reign was a delicate balancing act, a tightrope walk between the ideal and the real, the myth and the mundane. And as we delve deeper into her story, one thing remains certain. Elizabeth I was a force of nature who shaped the destiny of a nation, leaving a legacy as rich and complex as the era she helped define. And speaking of legacies, Elizabeth's later years were a masterclass in handling more plot twists than a soap opera. As if the Spanish Armada wasn't enough of a headache, enter Mary, Queen of Scots, a cousin who could give any Game of Thrones character a run for their money. Mary was a Catholic with a claim to the English throne, a combination that made her as welcome to Elizabeth as a wasp at a picnic. In 1568, Mary fled to England seeking Elizabeth's protection after a series of unfortunate events in Scotland left her crowned Queen of Chaos instead of the Scots. Instead of offering her a cozy guest bedroom, Elizabeth saw the potential for a coup and had Mary detained for an impressive 19 years. Talk about overstaying your welcome. During this time, Mary became the focal point for Catholic plots and conspiracies like the Ridolfi plot of 1571 and the Babington plot of 1586. Elizabeth, ever the cautious strategist, had Mary under constant surveillance, showing more patience than a cat at a mouse hole. But eventually, patience wore thin. The Babington plot was the last straw, when evidence surfaced that Mary was complicit in plans to assassinate Elizabeth and take the throne. The Virgin Queen was left with a decision as thorny as a Tudor rose bush. Reluctantly, she signed Mary's death warrant in 1587, an action that haunted her. Elizabeth was no stranger to the political game, but executing a fellow monarch was a hefty burden, even for a queen who was no stranger to hard choices. Elizabeth's resilience in the face of these challenges was legendary. Despite ruling over a nation that seemed to thrive on political intrigue, she maintained her grip on power with a deftness that would make even the most seasoned spin doctors envious. Yet this mastery came at a personal cost. Elizabeth's court was a viper's nest of ambition, and trust was a luxury she could seldom afford. Friends turned into foes faster than you could say royal scandal, and alliances were as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. The internal threats were as persistent as the external ones. The Essex Rebellion of 1601, led by the charismatic yet reckless Robert de Veru, Earl of Essex, was one of the more dramatic episodes. Essex, once a favourite of Elizabeth's, fell from grace after a series of political blunders and personal antics that would have made the tabloids drool. In a last-ditch effort to regain power, he attempted a coup that was about as well planned as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. The rebellion was swiftly quashed, and Essex was executed, leaving Elizabeth with yet another betrayal to add to her collection. As the years ticked on, the toll of leadership became increasingly apparent. Elizabeth's health began to wane, and the once vibrant queen became a shadow of her former self. By the time 1603 rolled around, she was in her late 60s, a remarkable age for the era, where the average life expectancy was around 35. Her later years were marked by bouts of melancholy, which some historians attribute to a mix of exhaustion and the cumulative grief of losing trusted advisers and friends. Yet, even in her twilight years, Elizabeth's wit remained as sharp as ever. She was a ruler who understood the power of image and symbolism, using them to maintain her authority until the very end. Her refusal to name a successor kept the court on tenterhooks, a final act of political theatre from a queen who had turned statecraft into an art form. In March 1603, Elizabeth passed away, leaving behind a legacy as complex as it was enduring. Her reign had transformed England from a beleaguered island nation into a burgeoning empire, setting the stage for the global dominance that would follow in the centuries to come. She was the last of the Tudors, a dynasty that had seen more drama than a Shakespearean tragedy. Elizabeth's story is a testament to the power of resilience, intelligence, and sheer determination. Her reign was a dance on the razor's edge, a delicate balancing act between myth and reality, power and vulnerability. And while her life was filled with challenges that would have crushed lesser mortals, Elizabeth emerged as a monarch who not only survived but thrived, leaving an indelible mark on history. As England mourned the passing of its formidable queen, the echoes of her reign would reverberate through the ages, a reminder of the woman who defied the odds and redefined what it meant to rule. As England bid farewell to Elizabeth I, the echoes of her reign reverberated like a rock concert encore that nobody wanted to end. Her legacy isn't just a dusty relic in the attic of history. It's a living testament to a queen who turned the tides of fortune with all the finesse of a seasoned poker player bluffing her way to victory. The question, though, is what exactly did she leave behind? Well, buckle up, because we're about to unravel the myth from the monarch. Elizabeth I, the so-called Virgin Queen, is often depicted as the ultimate symbol of purity and power, a monarch who ruled with an aura so dazzling it could light up a room. But let's be real, the reality was a touch more complex. Sure, she played the part of the unattainable sovereign, but it was less about chastity and more about strategy. Remaining single in a world where marriage was practically a royal duty wasn't a romantic choice. It was a political masterstroke, a way to dodge foreign influence and keep England firmly under her own thumb. Elizabeth understood that marriage could drag England into alliances as tangled as the Christmas lights you swore you put away neatly last year. The allure of the Virgin Queen image is undeniable, but it's crucial to remember that it was a carefully curated brand, not an autobiography. This image kept foreign suitors on their toes and domestic nobility guessing, allowing Elizabeth to wield power with a deftness that would make a magician envious. Behind the scenes, though, she was anything but passive. Elizabeth navigated the treacherous waters of international politics with the precision of a chess grandmaster, balancing between aggression and diplomacy like they were her morning cup of tea. And let's not forget a knack for marketing, centuries before the term was even coined. Elizabeth's portraits were early modern Instagram posts, meticulously crafted to project strength, wisdom, and divine right. Her likeness appeared in sumptuous gowns, draped with jewels, and surrounded by symbols of power like globes and crowns. Each portrait was a visual press release, reinforcing her status as an unassailable monarch. The reality, however, was that behind the velvet and pearls, Elizabeth was dealing with political and economic challenges that would have made a lesser ruler run for the hills. Speaking of economics, Elizabeth's reign was a masterclass in fiscal juggling. She inherited a kingdom with a debt larger than Henry Roman VIII waistline, around pound 227,000, and that's in 16th century money. But instead of being overwhelmed, she implemented policies that would make any modern accountant proud. Elizabeth stabilized the currency, encouraged trade, and supported burgeoning industries like textiles and shipbuilding. By the time she left the throne, England's economy was a leaner, meaner machine, even if it did still have a few structural squeaks and groans. Her legacy isn't just about gold coins and trade routes, though. Culturally, Elizabeth's reign was a veritable Renaissance fair, minus the turkey legs. The arts flourished under her patronage, with Shakespeare penning plays that would outlive even the most enduring memes. The Globe Theatre became a cultural hub where the high and mighty rubbed elbows with the common folk, all united by the bard's genius. Yet, while the stage sparkled, the streets told a grimmer tale. Plague and poverty were constant shadows, reminding everyone that the Elizabethan Golden Age had a few tarnished bits. So, what can today's leaders learn from Elizabeth I, apart from the fact that a strong public image is worth its weight in gold? For starters, her blend of diplomacy and strength is a masterclass in leadership. Elizabeth understood that power wasn't just about wielding a sword, but knowing when to sheath it. Her ability to negotiate, to play rivals against each other, and to maintain a balance of power in Europe was nothing short of brilliant. Modern leaders could take a page from her book by recognizing the importance of strategic alliances and the art of compromise. Yet, perhaps Elizabeth's most enduring lesson is the power of adaptability. She faced challenges that would have sent others packing: a volatile religious climate, economic woes, and political conspiracies, and she overcame them by evolving her strategies. Elizabeth's reign was a testament to the idea that leadership isn't about rigidity, but about being flexible enough to bend without breaking. And then there's her famous speech at Tilbury in 1588, one of those historical moments that feels like it was scripted by a Hollywood screenwriter. With the Spanish Armada threatening England's shores, Elizabeth donned a suit of armor and addressed her troops with a speech that would have made any motivational speaker proud. "I have the body of a weak and feeble woman," she said, "but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England, too." It was a line that rallied her soldiers and showed the world that while Elizabeth might have been a queen, she commanded like a king. In the final analysis, Elizabeth I was more than just a monarch. She was a force of nature, a woman who defied expectations and redefined what it meant to rule. Her legacy is a tapestry of myth and reality, woven together into a story that continues to capture our imaginations. As we close the book on Elizabeth's reign, one thing is clear. She was a queen who played the game of thrones like no other, leaving behind a legacy as complex and enduring as the woman herself. In the relentless chaos of ancient China, the Warring States period was like a never-ending reality show where the stakes were your head on a pike. Picture 7 states, each with its own ambitions, like feudal lords with armies duking it out for who gets to be top dog. It was a time when you couldn't swing a sword without hitting a soldier or stumbling into a skirmish. Between 475 and 221 BCE, the landscape was a chessboard of alliances and betrayals, with everyone playing for keeps. This was no time to be a pacifist unless you wanted to practice your Zen in the afterlife. Enter Sun Tzu, the mysterious sage and strategist, whose name is still dropped more than 2 millennia later in boardrooms as well as battlefields. Now, Sun Tzu might not have had a LinkedIn profile, but he had something better: The Art of War, a slim volume that became, and remains, the definitive guide on how to outsmart your enemies without necessarily bashing their heads in. Funny enough, some historians wonder if he was even a real person, or more like a brand name cooked up by clever scribes. Think of him as the ancient world's first ghostwriter, if not a ghost himself. So, why did this period of incessant conflict produce such a gem of strategic thought? Well, necessity is the mother of invention, and survival was the mother of all necessities back then. The Warring States were like a group of frenemies locked in a game of risk, each plotting to expand their territories while keeping an eye on the other's dice rolls. The constant threat of war was as predictable as the sunrise, and leaders needed every edge they could get. Enter Sun Tzu, stage left, with a manuscript that said, "Hey, maybe ponder your moves before you make them." Revolutionary, right? Sun Tzu's wisdom was not about the glory of war, but its brutal efficiency. All warfare is based on deception. He wrote, clearly aware that honesty was not a virtue prized on the battlefield. A commander might tell you that winning without fighting is the acme of skill, which sounds a lot like getting in without taking the test. He offered advice like, in the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity, which might have seemed like an optimistic take if you were knee-deep in mud with arrows whizzing past your head. But to leaders who were more concerned with keeping their heads on their shoulders and their states intact, it was pure gold. The cultural backdrop was fierce. States like Qin, Chu, and Zhao were not just playing king of the hill, they were reshaping the very identity of what it meant to rule in China. The Qin, for instance, were the most ambitious, eventually conquering the rest to unify China, but not before generations of warfare had turned the landscape into a patchwork of shifting borders and alliances. Life expectancy wasn't exactly booming, and most people lived in constant uncertainty, a bit like trying to plan a picnic in a hurricane. While Sun Tzu might have been the rock star of strategy, the real work was done by the soldiers and generals who took his words to heart. They learned to move like water, to strike where least expected, and to value spies over swordsmen. Sun Tzu's teachings encouraged leaders to be like chess masters, seeing the whole board and thinking several moves ahead. This was not about brute force but cunning, a brain-over-brawn approach that has kept the art of war on the bestseller list for over 2 millennia. So, as the warring states clashed and collided, Sun Tzu's strategic insights offered a lifeline to those who could read between the lines, or more accurately, every line. His art of war was less a call to arms than a call to think, a timeless reminder that sometimes the smartest strategy is the one that avoids the fight altogether. And in a world where the next battle was always just around the corner, that was advice worth its weight in gold, or, at least, worth not ending up as a cautionary tale in someone else's strategy book. In the grand tapestry of Sun Tzu's wisdom, one thread remains particularly shiny: the idea of winning without fighting. It sounds like the kind of advice you'd find in a fortune cookie. Right next to you will find success in unexpected places. But in the cutthroat world of ancient China, it was the ultimate life hack. Picture a soldier sitting around a campfire, reading these words and thinking, "Great, but how about we win without me getting an arrow in the knee?" Yet, for the generals and strategists, this was revolutionary. It was as if Sun Tzu handed them a key to the back door of victory, suggesting that battles could be won in the mind long before swords clashed. Sun Tzu's core philosophies were like a master class in psychological warfare. Take know your enemy, for instance. It sounds obvious today, but back then, it was a radical shift from the usual approach of charge first, ask questions never. He basically argued that understanding your opponent's motivations and weaknesses was more valuable than having 10,000 soldiers at your beck and call. In a world where intelligence often meant the difference between life and death, this was groundbreaking, or at least skull-saving, advice. He was the ancient Chinese equivalent of a modern-day data analyst, crunching numbers to predict enemy moves before they even knew what they were. But let's not kid ourselves here. While the allure of outsmarting your enemy with wits instead of weapons is romantic, the reality on the ground was often less cerebral. Sun Tzu's strategies might have sounded like pearls of wisdom to the strategists, but to the average foot soldier, knee-deep in mud and misery, they could feel as useful as a silk robe in a rainstorm. Winning without fighting sounds great, until you're the one who has to figure out how, exactly, to pull that off when your opponent is charging at you with a spear. It's like being told to win a chess game without capturing any pieces. Sure, it's possible, but try explaining that to someone who just wants to avoid being checkmated by lunchtime. Now, was Sun Tzu a philosopher masquerading as a general, or vice versa? That's the million-yuan question. Some historians argue he was more of a thinker than a fighter, a man who saw the battlefield as a giant chessboard rather than a place to rack up body counts. His emphasis on strategy over slaughter suggests a mindset more aligned with Confucian ideals than Machiavellian machinations. However, considering that his name has survived more than 2 millennia in military lore, it's safe to say he knew his way around a sword or two, or at least how to make others wield them effectively. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and Sun Tzu's ideas have somehow infiltrated the modern boardroom. Yes, while his contemporaries were busy with chariots and crossbows, today's CEOs are quoting The Art of War in strategy meetings. It's almost comical to think that a text written in a time when the biggest tech innovation was the crossbow is now being used to navigate corporate mergers. But here we are, with Know Your Enemy becoming a mantra for market analysts, and all warfare is based on deception, serving as the unofficial slogan of marketing departments worldwide. In fact, if you've ever sat through a corporate meeting and thought, "Why does this feel like a battlefield?" you can thank, or blame, Sun Tzu. The resonance of Sun Tzu's philosophies in the modern world is a testament to their timelessness. He's like the original life coach, dropping truth bombs that apply whether you're facing an army or a quarterly sales target. It's kind of ironic that a man who might have been more philosopher than warrior has become the go-to strategist for everyone from military tacticians to Silicon Valley execs. Yet, his teachings, distilled into bite-sized nuggets of wisdom, have an appeal that transcends their original context. They're like the ancient equivalent of a viral tweet, concise, impactful, and open to interpretation. So, as we continue to explore the enigmatic mind of Sun Tzu, we're left to ponder how a man, or perhaps a myth, crafted ideas that have outlasted empires and evolved from battlefield doctrine to business strategy. His legacy is not just a relic of ancient warfare, but a living, breathing philosophy that challenges us to think before we act, to plan before we pounce, and to win without necessarily drawing blood. As we dive deeper into this historical saga, remember that the next time you hear someone say, "It's not personal, it's just business," you might just be hearing an echo of Sun Tzu's ancient wisdom. Stay tuned, because the plot, much like a well-laid plan, thickens. As we unravel the enigma of Sun Tzu, it's time to flip the page from strategy to biography, or at least the parts of it that haven't been lost to time or exaggerated into legend. Step aside, tabloids, because ancient China might have written the book on sensationalist storytelling. One story that continues to captivate imaginations like a blockbuster action flick is the tale of Sun Tzu and the concubines. You've heard it. A room full of palace concubines transformed into a crack military unit with the right dose of discipline and cunning. Sounds like the ancient version of a reality TV makeover show, doesn't it? Picture this. Sun Tzu is invited by the king of Wu to demonstrate his military prowess. Naturally, he decides the best way to do this is not by staging a mock battle with soldiers, but by wrangling the royal harem into formation. Now, Sun Tzu, ever the strategist, divides the concubines into two groups, appointing the king's favorite concubines as leaders. He issues orders to march left, march right, and when the giggles erupt instead of discipline, he calls for a timeout. This is where things take a turn from amusing to downright brutal, or so the story goes. Sun Tzu reportedly executes the two appointed leaders. Yes, the king's favorites, because they failed to enforce his commands. Talk about high stakes. The remaining concubines, presumably not wanting to share the same fate, fall into line faster than you can say military precision. At this point, the king, who might have been more interested in his concubines' dance steps than their marching skills, tells Sun Tzu to stop. But Sun Tzu counters with a lesson on leadership. If orders aren't followed, it's the leader's fault. Brutal, but effective, if you believe the tale, that is. Now, let's hold up the romantic lens for a second. This story is as much about power dynamics as it is about military strategy. It showcases Sun Tzu's purported belief in the necessity of discipline and the idea that leadership is all about accountability. But is it true? The skeptic in us might question the reliability of such anecdotes, especially when ancient historians had a penchant for drama that rivals modern Hollywood scriptwriters. The source of this tale, the Spring and Autumn Annals, isn't exactly known for its objectivity. Consider this. Ancient biographies were as much about myth-making as they were about fact-reporting. They were designed not just to inform, but to inspire, to elevate figures to legendary status. They wanted to create role models or cautionary tales, not simply dish out dry facts. In Sun Tzu's case, stories like the concubine incident were meant to underscore his authority and strategic genius, even if they required a little creative embellishment. It's like that friend who always has the best stories at parties. You're never quite sure if they're true, but they're too good not to share. And why wouldn't the scribes of ancient China want to immortalize Sun Tzu in such a dramatic fashion? The Warring States period was a time when a single decisive action could change the fate of entire kingdoms. Leaders needed not just tactics, but tales that would inspire loyalty and fear in equal measure. Sun Tzu's legend, peppered with these larger-than-life anecdotes, served that purpose beautifully. Let's not forget the economic context here. In a society where warfare was a constant and costly endeavor, the ability to inspire soldiers and civilians alike with tales of unbeatable strategy was as valuable as gold. Sun Tzu's theoretical execution of the concubines demonstrated a kind of ruthless efficiency that spoke directly to the needs of his time. After all, a unified, disciplined force was cheaper and more effective than a chaotic, undisciplined one. The story, whether true or not, highlighted the economic and military necessity of order and obedience. Even if we strip away the sensationalism, the core of Sun Tzu's teachings remains clear. Effective leadership is non-negotiable when the stakes are life and death. Perhaps the true lesson from the concubine story isn't its factual accuracy, but its symbolic power. It's a narrative that underscores the importance of discipline and leadership, elements essential for survival in a world where war was the norm, not the exception. So, while the tale of Sun Tzu and the concubines might be more legend than fact, it's a testament to the enduring appeal of a good story and the human tendency to elevate historical figures into mythical heroes. Whether Sun Tzu was a real person or a carefully constructed persona, his legacy continues to march on, much like those mythical concubines, in perfect formation. Stay tuned as we continue to sift through the sands of time, separating the man from the myth, and uncovering the truths that continue to resonate through the ages. As we chart our course from Sun Tzu's legendary exploits to his enduring global influence, let's ditch the myth-making and dive into how the art of war became the strategic sage handbook for generations of leaders who wanted to win without breaking a sweat, or breaking a sweat over their failures. From the grand strategies of Napoleon to modern military academies, Sun Tzu's ancient wisdom has been hailed as the ultimate playbook, and sometimes a fool's errand. Fast forward to the 19th century, Napoleon Bonaparte, the French emperor with a penchant for reshaping Europe like a kid with a new set of Legos, reportedly kept the art of war close at hand. Napoleon, a man whose battle plans were as elaborate as his coronation ceremony, admired Sun Tzu's focus on speed and deception. He was the kind of guy who'd appreciate lines like, "Appear at points which the enemy must hasten to defend." It's said that he used these principles to outmaneuver his foes in famous battles like Austerlitz in 1805, where he faced down the combined forces of Russia and Austria. Napoleon's quick victory over a numerically superior enemy echoed Sun Tzu's strategy of striking decisively and swiftly, like a military version of speed, dating where the stakes were empires instead of romantic partners. Yet, for every military genius who successfully wielded Sun Tzu's wisdom, there's another who turned his teachings into a spectacular misadventure. Take General George B. McClellan of the American Civil War fame, or infamy. Nicknamed Little Mac, McClellan was an avid reader of military theory, including the art of war. However, his cautious nature and penchant for preparation made him more of a strategic procrastinator than a decisive commander. In 1862, during the Peninsular Campaign, he had 121,000 troops at his disposal, more than enough to overrun the Confederate forces in Virginia. But instead of embodying Sun Tzu's advice to strike while the iron is hot, McClellan hesitated, waiting for the perfect moment that never came. His failure to capitalize on his numerical advantage showed that knowing the strategy is one thing, applying it effectively is another. Meanwhile, across the pond, the British Empire was busy painting the world map red, and Sun Tzu was whispering in the ears of some of its most renowned generals. The book was translated into English in the early 20th century, just in time for the British to apply, or misapply, it during the tumultuous times of World War I. The Battle of the Somme in 1916 serves as a grim example. If Sun Tzu preached flexibility and adaptation, the British High Command seemed to have missed that memo. Instead, they launched a massive frontal assault against well-entrenched German positions, resulting in over 1 million casualties. The lesson: sometimes reading between the lines of the art of war means understanding that brute force and entrenched thinking can lead to entrenched failures. But wait, Sun Tzu's influence isn't just a historical footnote. It's a living, breathing doctrine in the hallowed halls of modern military academies. West Point, Sandhurst, and Russia's General Staff Academy all incorporate Sun Tzu's teachings into their curriculums. It's like a rite of passage for officers who want to graduate with the strategic acumen to avoid disasters like the aforementioned. Stripped of its ancient trappings, the art of war becomes a toolkit for navigating the intricacies of modern warfare, where knowing when not to fight is as crucial as knowing how to fight. Yet, even in modern times, Sun Tzu's wisdom can be more of a double-edged sword than a guiding light. Consider the Vietnam War, where American military leaders, armed with the latest technology and superior firepower, underestimated the Vietnamese guerrilla tactics, an era Sun Tzu would have likely face-palmed over. The Viet Cong, masters of ambush and deception, embodied Sun Tzu's principle of knowing the enemy, turning the jungle into their ally and the American superiority into a quagmire. Ironically, the U.S. military's failure to adapt to these tactics illustrates that Sun Tzu's lessons can sting when ignored or misapplied. In the corporate world, where boardrooms replace battlefields and stock prices are the spoils of war, The Art of War has become the self-help book of choice for ambitious CEOs. But much like the missteps of military strategists, the business world has its share of Sun Tzu-inspired blunders. Remember the infamous new Coke fiasco of 1985? In a bid to outmaneuver Pepsi, Coca-Cola reformed their sacred recipe, only to face a consumer backlash as bitter as Sun Tzu's view on arrogance. It was a classic case of failing to know thyself, as the company learned the hard way that brand loyalty can't be easily reformulated. And what about the tech industry, where Sun Tzu's emphasis on innovation and anticipation is practically gospel? Apple's rise under Steve Jobs is often cited as a textbook case of strategic foresight, but let's not forget the Apple Newton, the PDA that flopped harder than a fish out of water. In trying to lead the charge in personal digital assistance, Apple's premature launch proved that timing, another Sun Tzu staple, is everything. As we wrap this segment, let's acknowledge that Sun Tzu's Art of War is both a beacon of wisdom and a cautionary tale. It's a reminder that strategy is not just about having the right book on your shelf, but knowing when and how to turn its pages into action. Whether on the battlefield or the boardroom, the lessons of Sun Tzu remain as relevant and as challenging as ever. So, stay tuned as we continue our historical deep dive, exploring how this ancient text continues to shape the modern world in surprising ways. So, here we stand at the crossroads of ancient wisdom and modern mischief, pondering how the art of war has managed to stay relevant, or at least catchy, in a world where wars are often fought with tweets and trade policies rather than swords and spears. How did Sun Tzu, with his scrolls of sage advice, become the darling of not just military academies, but also sports coaches and self-help gurus? First off, let's address the elephant in the room, the misapplication of Sun Tzu's principles. It's like using a rocket launcher to swat a fly. Impressive, but way off target. Take the sports industry. Coaches across the globe swear by the art of war as if quoting Sun Tzu is the secret sauce to winning the Super Bowl. You can almost hear a coach rallying his team. Remember, team, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. So let's win this game without actually playing. Not exactly a halftime speech that's going to inspire a come-from-behind victory, but it does highlight the allure of Sun Tzu's ideas. They make you feel smarter just by association. Now, let's talk about the self-help world, where Sun Tzu's name is tossed around like confetti at a parade. The Art of War is marketed as the ultimate guide to success, a roadmap to navigating life's challenges with the precision of a military campaign. It's as if every battle, be it personal or professional, is just a Sun Tzu quote away from resolution. But let's be real. Life's complexities often require more than a pithy aphorism. Sometimes, the best strategy isn't about knowing your enemy, but understanding yourself, a nuance that even the great strategist might nod in agreement with. And speaking of understanding oneself, how would Sun Tzu react to his posthumous fame in the age of memes? Imagine him scrolling through social media, chuckling, or perhaps cringing, at how his teachings have been distilled into bite-sized nuggets of wisdom. Appear at points which the enemy must hasten to defend becomes show up where you're least expected over a picture of a cat on a keyboard. The essence remains, but the context is hilariously lost in translation. Sun Tzu, ever the strategist, might appreciate the humor but question the strategy. Let's not forget the cultural backdrop that has allowed the art of war to transcend time and geography. In an era where information is currency, Sun Tzu's emphasis on intelligence and adaptability resonates more than ever. We live in a world where data is the new oil, and understanding your competition can be the key to thriving in crowded markets. Companies invest billions in market research, echoing Sun Tzu's age-old mantra, know your enemy and know yourself, and you can fight 100 battles with no danger of defeat. It's no wonder that modern businesses continue to mine his text for tactical gold. Yet, for all its modern applications, the true genius of Sun Tzu lies in his understanding of human nature. His strategies are less about warfare and more about the psychology of conflict. When he wrote, "All warfare is based on deception," he wasn't just talking about fooling the enemy, but understanding the deceit within ourselves, the illusions we hold about our capabilities and limitations. This introspective angle is what gives his work a timeless quality, allowing it to speak across centuries to anyone grappling with conflict, whether on the battlefield or in the boardroom. Economically speaking, the adaptability of Sun Tzu's wisdom is also a testament to its efficiency. In a world where budgets are often tighter than a drum, the idea of winning without fighting is not just appealing but necessary. Warfare, whether literal or metaphorical, is costly, financially, emotionally, and socially. Sun Tzu's strategies offer a blueprint for minimizing these costs, advocating for a smarter, more resourceful approach to conflict resolution. Yet, for all its appeal, the art of war is not without its critics. Some argue that its principles are too simplistic, more philosophical than practical. But perhaps that's the point. Sun Tzu doesn't offer a one-size-fits-all strategy. Rather, he provides a framework for thinking strategically, encouraging adaptability and critical thinking. It's like giving someone a fishing rod instead of a fish, empowering but requiring effort and insight to truly master. As we wrap up this journey through the annals of strategy, it's clear that Sun Tzu's real legacy is not just a series of tactical tips, but a mindset, a way of approaching problems that values intellect over aggression, strategy over strength. In a world where challenges are ever-evolving, this perspective is as invaluable as it is enduring. So, whether you're a general in the field, a CEO in the boardroom, or just trying to navigate the battlefield of daily life, remember that Sun Tzu's wisdom is less about the art of war and more about the art of thinking. As we bid adieu to this ancient strategist, perhaps we should take a leaf out of his scroll and ponder not just how to win, but how to win wisely. And who knows, maybe the next time you face a challenge, you'll find yourself channeling your inner Sun Tzu, not with a battle cry, but with a thoughtful plan and a strategic smile. Ever wondered how the ancient Egyptians managed to build an empire without the magic of Google Maps or the convenience of a rest stop? Meet the Nile River, the OG interstate of antiquity. This legendary river, stretching a casual 258 miles, was the lifeline of Egypt's trade network, a watery highway that cut through the desert like a cool blue scar, keeping the wheels of commerce turning and the grain silos full. Now, let's be real. The idea of ancient Egyptians cruising down the Nile on their sleek papyrus boats sounds almost romantic, doesn't it? But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't some idyllic gondola ride down the Venetian canals. It was more like a hardcore logistics operation that would make a modern supply chain manager break out in a cold sweat. Picture high-stakes river travel, sans GPS, where the only traffic control was the occasional angry hippo or a wayward crocodile. So, what exactly were these ancient entrepreneurs hauling up and down the Nile? Well, the staples of the Egyptian trade menu included grain, papyrus, and linen. Grain was the bread and butter, literally, of the Egyptian economy. Not only did it feed the masses, but it also served as a kind of primitive currency. Forget Bitcoin. In ancient Egypt, your wealth was measured in bushels of barley. Papyrus, on the other hand, was the ancient world's answer to email. It was used for everything from administrative records to the occasional love letter. Linen, meanwhile, was the fabric of choice for everything from mummy wrappings to high-fashion pharaoh wear. But before you get too starry-eyed about the glamour of ancient trade, let's take a step back and appreciate the sheer logistical nightmare of it all. Imagine coordinating shipments across those 258 miles of Nile, with no modern tech, just relying on the stars and the seasonal whims of the river. It wasn't just about getting goods from point A to point B, it was about timing. The Nile's annual flooding, known as the inundation, was the ultimate traffic jam, but also a blessing, fertilizing the fields and ensuring a bountiful harvest. Miss the window, and your shipment might end up as fish food, or worse, stuck in some bureaucratic limbo at a local dock. Yet, despite these challenges, the Egyptians managed to establish a trade network that was the envy of the ancient world. How did they pull it off? Part of it was sheer geographic luck. The Nile, with its predictable northward flow and southward winds, was the perfect natural conveyor belt. It allowed for relatively easy movement of goods and people, creating a unifying thread from the Mediterranean coast all the way to the upper reaches of Nubia. This connectivity not only fueled Egypt's economy, but also its cultural exchange, bringing in exotic goods, new ideas, and even the odd foreign dignitary or two. Of course, this bustling trade wasn't just about survival or even prosperity. It was also a tool of power. Control over the Nile meant control over trade routes, and by extension, over the wealth and resources that flowed along them. The pharaohs knew this, and they weren't shy about flexing their economic muscles. They built massive granaries like those at Ramesseum to store surplus grain, ensuring they could feed their people and soldiers, keeping everyone happy, or at least too full to revolt. So, while the Nile might have been the backbone of Egyptian trade, it was also a stage for the drama of power, politics, and the occasional scandal. And let's not forget the social factor. The bustling docks and marketplaces were the ancient equivalent of Twitter feeds or Reddit threads, places where news, gossip, and the latest must-have luxury item spread faster than a pharaoh's decree. In the end, the Nile wasn't just a river. It was the lifeblood of a civilization that thrived on its banks, a constant reminder that in the grand theater of history, geography often plays the lead role. And as we dive deeper into the world of ancient Egyptian trade, remember that every grain of barley, every roll of papyrus, and every yard of linen wasn't just a commodity. It was a testament to the ingenuity and tenacity of a people who turned a mighty river into the backbone of an empire. But if you thought the Nile was the beginning and end of Egypt's trade tale, think again. The Egyptians were not just river traders. They were globetrotters of the ancient world. They stretched their influence beyond their sandy borders, forging international connections that would make even the most seasoned LinkedIn user jealous. Let's start with Lebanon, the land of cedar wood, a resource so revered it was practically the VIP of ancient building materials. See, Egypt wasn't exactly overflowing with lush forests. Their desert landscape was more sand dunes and pyramids than idyllic woodland retreats. So, when it came time to build something grand, like a pyramid or a temple, the Egyptians had to look elsewhere for their lumber, and Lebanon was the place to get it. Now, don't let the romanticized image of pharaohs effortlessly commanding fleets of ships to fetch exotic goods fool you. The reality was far less glamorous and way more complicated. Picture this. A maritime expedition to Lebanon was a logistical headache that involved months of planning. You had to prepare ships, secure provisions, and ensure you had a crew that knew their starboard from their port side. We're talking about an investment that was as much about economics as it was about prestige. The cedar trade wasn't just about fancy woodwork, though. It was a testament to a powerful economic network. The Egyptians didn't just wander into the nearest forest and start chopping. They negotiated with local rulers, traded goods, and in some cases paid hefty sums to secure their timber. Think of it as an early version of international trade agreements, complete with all the diplomacy and occasional backroom deals you'd expect. The Egyptians knew the value of cedar, not just for its durability, but also for its symbolic power. A piece of Lebanon's finest in your building was like having a designer label on your temple. It spoke volumes about your status and reach. And then there's Punt, a place shrouded in just the right amount of mystery to fuel centuries of speculation. Known as the land of the gods, Punt was where the Egyptians went shopping for the exotic and the luxurious. We're talking incense, ebony, gold, and even live animals that would put any modern-day exotic pet shop to shame. But getting there wasn't a simple jaunt down the Nile. It required a seafaring voyage along the Red Sea, a journey fraught with perils that would make even the hardiest of sailors think twice. The economics of trading with Punt were just as complex as getting there. The Egyptians exchanged manufactured goods and grain for Punt's treasures. But let's not pretend this was always a smooth transaction. The cost of these expeditions was astronomical. Ships had to be built or repaired, crews had to be paid, and provisions had to be stocked. And let's not forget the time involved. A commodity as valuable as any gold or incense. A round trip to Punt could take months, and there was no guarantee you'd return with your ship's hold full of precious cargo. It was a calculated risk, a gamble of resources and lives, where the potential payoff was high, but so were the stakes. These international trade connections were more than just economic transactions. They were lifelines that linked Egypt to the wider world, bringing in not just goods, but also ideas, technologies, and cultural influences. They showed that even in ancient times, isolation wasn't an option. Egypt's trade networks were a testament to the ingenuity and ambition of a civilization that refused to be limited by its geography. Of course, these ventures weren't without their myths. The tales of pharaohs dispatching fleets with a mere wave of their hand contribute to the romantic allure. But let's debunk that myth right here. The reality was that these undertakings required organization, negotiation, and no small amount of grit. They were less about divine decree and more about human endeavor. The pharaohs may have had the final say, but the success of these missions rested on the shoulders of countless unnamed workers and crew members who braved the seas and navigated the complexities of international diplomacy. As we look back at Egypt's international trade networks, it's clear they were both a source of wealth and a testament to the empire's far-reaching influence. The tales of cedar wood from Lebanon and incense from Punt are not just stories of ancient commerce. They are reminders of a world interconnected long before the advent of modern technology. They show us an ancient Egypt that was as much about strategic alliances and economic savvy as it was about monumental architecture and divine rule. And while the allure of these ancient tales continues to captivate, it's the reality, the preparation, the cost, the human effort that truly deserves our admiration. The Egyptians weren't just builders of pyramids. They were architects of a complex global network that spanned deserts, seas, and cultures. And as we delve deeper into their story, we see not just an empire of stone, but a civilization built on the currents of trade and the ingenuity to turn challenges into opportunities. Now, speaking of turning challenges into opportunities, let's dive into the murky waters of ancient Egyptian politics, where treaties and royal marriages were the name of the game. Think of it as the ultimate chess match, but with a lot more eyeliner and a smattering of gold leaf. You see, for the pharaohs, trade wasn't just about acquiring the latest must-have luxury item from abroad. It was about wielding influence, cementing power, and occasionally giving Cupid a nudge with a diplomatic marriage or two. Let's kick things off with the treaties. These weren't your run-of-the-mill agreements hashed out over a cup of tea. No, these were epic documents, often inscribed on stone tablets or papyrus scrolls, ancient PDFs, if you will. The Treaty of Kadesh, for instance, signed in 1259 BCE between Ramses II of Egypt and Hattusili III of the Hittites, is often hailed as the world's first known peace treaty. Not only did it end years of hostilities between the two superpowers, but it also facilitated trade by ensuring safe passage for merchants through once hostile territories. The treaty's terms were carved into the walls of Karnak Temple for all to see, a sort of ancient billboard proclaiming, "We're open for business." But let's not kid ourselves about the warm and fuzzy feelings here. This wasn't about peace for peace's sake. It was about securing strategic advantages. By smoothing things over with the Hittites, the Egyptians opened up trade routes to the rich lands of Anatolia, where silver and other precious metals were there for the haggling. This wasn't a friendship bracelet exchange. It was a shrewd business move wrapped in the guise of diplomacy. Now, when treaties weren't enough to seal the deal, there was always the time-tested tradition of royal marriages. Picture this: a prince or princess being shipped off to a foreign court, not because they swiped right on some ancient dating app, but because they were a political pawn in a high-stakes game of international relations. These unions were less about romance and more about reinforcing alliances and keeping enemies close, really close. Take the marriage of Thutmose IV to a Mitanni princess, for example. This wasn't just about adding another name to the family tree. It was a strategic maneuver to secure peace and trade routes to the east, opening the doors to the tantalizing treasures of Mesopotamia. Speaking of treasures, let's talk about the booty that came with these diplomatic moves. Royal dowries were no mere token gifts. We're talking about serious wealth transfers, complete with gold, silver, livestock, and even armies in some cases. It was like a trust fund with military benefits. These marriages brought more than riches. They brought influence and a web of connections that could be leveraged for decades. Diplomacy, however, wasn't all about playing nice. There was a healthy dose of realpolitik at play, too. The pharaohs were nothing if not opportunists, and they knew how to capitalize on a rival's moment of weakness. Look at Amenhotep III, whose reign in the 14th century BCE was marked by shrewd diplomatic maneuvers. He skillfully played the game of international relations, maintaining a balance of power by pitting rival states against each other when it suited him. His correspondence, the Amarna letters, reveals a world where gold was not just a currency, but a diplomatic tool. In one letter to a foreign king, Amenhotep casually mentioned, "Gold is as plentiful as dirt in Egypt." Subtle, right? It was a reminder that Egypt was the place to be if you wanted to strike a deal. But let's not forget the stakes. While the pharaohs wined and dined their foreign guests and exchanged gifts and pleasantries, the real prize was control over resources and trade routes. They were playing a long game, one where maintaining the upper hand was key to sustaining their empire. The pharaohs knew that their grip on power was as much about perception as it was about reality. They cultivated an image of untouchable might, backed by an economy that could outlast any siege. In this game of thrones, the pharaohs were masters of projection and negotiation. Their ability to manipulate the political landscape was as much a part of their legacy as the monuments they left behind. The grandeur of their reigns often overshadowed the gritty realities of maintaining an empire, but make no mistake, behind the glittering facade was a relentless pursuit of power and influence. As we unravel the intricate tapestry of Egypt's political maneuvers, it's clear that trade was more than just an economic activity. It was a tool of diplomacy, a weapon of power, and a testament to the ingenuity of a civilization that understood the art of negotiation long before the term was coined. These pharaohs were not just rulers. They were architects of a world where trade and politics were inextricably linked, each move on the international stage calculated to maintain their empire's dominance. So, as we continue our journey through the world of ancient Egyptian trade, remember that behind every treaty, every royal marriage, and every diplomatic gesture was a calculated strategy to secure Egypt's place in the annals of history. And while the stories of these political maneuvers may lack the romantic allure of grand monuments or epic battles, they reveal a side of the pharaohs that is every bit as fascinating, a testament to their skill in navigating the complex web of ancient geopolitics. And speaking of the gritty realities behind the glittering facade, let's turn our attention to the unsung heroes of ancient Egyptian trade, the everyday folks who made the whole system tick. Forget the pharaohs with their golden chariots and royal decrees. The real action was happening at ground level, where ordinary Egyptians transformed trade into a social revolution. First up, let's talk about the spread of ideas. Now, we often think of cultural exchange as a modern phenomenon. Thank you, Internet. But back in the day, Egypt was a cultural melting pot thanks to its bustling trade routes. Picture this. Merchants returning from distant lands, not just with exotic goods, but with stories, technologies, and even the odd philosophical nugget. It was like an ancient TED talk, but with more sand and fewer PowerPoint slides. From the Mesopotamian cuneiform that influenced Egyptian script to the introduction of new musical instruments, trade was the engine driving Egypt's cultural dynamism. But what about technology? Well, trade wasn't just about swapping goods. It was also about swapping know-how. Imagine a Nubian trader bringing ironworking techniques up the Nile, or a Phoenician introducing advanced shipbuilding methods. These exchanges were the ancient equivalent of a tech startup boom. And just like today's tech hubs, the innovation wasn't always evenly distributed. It centered around bustling trade cities like Thebes and Memphis, which became hotbeds of innovation and cultural exchange. Now, let's debunk a myth, the idea of a static, unchanging Egypt. Sure, the pyramids give off that eternal and unyielding vibe, but the reality was anything but static. Egypt evolved thanks to the dynamic exchanges brought by trade. New religious ideas filtered in, like the cult of Osiris, which gained prominence as trade expanded. Even the iconic Egyptian cuisine wasn't immune. Spices from the Levant and grains from Anatolia spiced up the local diet, making ancient Egyptian food a veritable smorgasbord of international flavors. But who were the real players in this game? Not the pharaohs, but the workers toiling away in the background. These were the sailors who navigated treacherous waters, the builders who constructed the docks, and the scribes who kept meticulous records of every transaction. They were the silent cogs in a vast economic machine, unsung heroes who kept the wheels of commerce turning. And let's not forget the artisans whose skills turned raw materials into luxury goods that were exported across the known world. Their craftsmanship was so renowned that Egyptian jewelry and pottery were coveted far beyond their borders. Now, If you're wondering what these everyday Egyptians might think of their historical anonymity, it's safe to say they'd have a few choice words. Imagine spending your life hauling goods up and down the Nile, only for a long-forgotten pharaoh to get all the credit. It's a bit like being the roadie for a rock band, essential to the show, but never in the spotlight. Yet, their contributions were invaluable, laying the groundwork for Egypt's economic power and cultural influence. Let's not forget the economic implications of this societal transformation. Trade wasn't just about acquiring wealth. It was about redistributing it. The influx of goods and ideas led to a burgeoning middle class of traders, artisans, and scribes who gradually gained more influence, chipping away at the rigid social hierarchy. This nascent middle class was crucial in driving innovation and economic diversification, ensuring that Egypt remained a formidable force in the ancient world. And all of this cultural and technological exchange wasn't without its challenges. The constant influx of new ideas and foreign influences sometimes led to social tensions. Traditionalists were wary of these changes, much like today's debates over globalization. Yet, the exchange continued, demonstrating the resilience and adaptability of Egyptian society. It's a testament to the Egyptians' ability to absorb and integrate new ideas while maintaining their unique identity, a balancing act that ensured their society's longevity. So, as we navigate the intricate web of ancient Egyptian trade, remember the vibrant and dynamic society it helped create. Trade was more than just an economic necessity. It was a catalyst for change that reshaped the cultural, technological, and social landscape of Egypt. The story of Egyptian trade is as much about the everyday people who embraced these changes as it is about the grand monuments and pharaohs that symbolize their civilization. As we continue our historical journey, it's clear that trade was the lifeblood of ancient Egypt, connecting it to the wider world in ways that went far beyond mere economic transactions. The social impacts of trade resonate through the ages, reminding us that even in antiquity, the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures was vital to the vitality and vibrancy of a society. The unsung heroes of Egyptian trade, the workers, traders, and artisans, played a pivotal role in this narrative, their contributions echoing through the corridors of history, much like the bustling marketplaces of their time. Now, let's dive headfirst into the twilight of ancient Egypt's trading prowess, a tale as layered as a pharaoh's burial ensemble, and nearly as heavy with implications. The decline of Egypt's trade networks reads like a cautionary tale of how even the mightiest can falter, and it starts, predictably, with a dose of good old-fashioned political upheaval. See, around 1069 BCE, the Grand New Kingdom, with its opulent temples and gold-studded crowns, decided to take a nosedive into chaos. Internal strife was the name of the game, with high priests and pharaohs playing an endless game of musical thrones. The once unified nation resembled a dysfunctional family reunion more than a global trade powerhouse. With each new power shift, trade agreements that had been painstakingly negotiated over decades were tossed out like last season's fashion. And let's not forget the pesky external pressures. Enter the Sea Peoples, motley crew whose origins are as mysterious and debated as the existence of Atlantis. In the 12th century BCE, these marauders swept across the Mediterranean like a tsunami of chaos, disrupting trade routes and leaving a trail of charred shipwrecks in their wake. Their attacks were less, "Hey, let's trade," and more, "Yoink, your cargo is ours now." This, dear listeners, was not conducive to maintaining a thriving trade network. Then there was the economic angle. Because, of course, nothing spells decline quite like financial woes. The cost of maintaining a sprawling empire, with its armies, monuments, and bureaucrats, was astronomical. Resources were stretched thinner than papyrus, and the state coffers began to look embarrassingly bare. Inflation reared its ugly head, so that by the time you got your paycheck, or rather, your share of grain, its purchasing power had evaporated faster than a puddle in the Sahara. As if that wasn't enough, Mother Nature decided to join the fray. The Nile, Egypt's erstwhile BFF and economic backbone, became unpredictable. The annual inundation that once brought life-giving silt and water now played coy. A series of low floods meant less fertile land, which meant less grain, which meant less trade. You see the domino effect here, right? When the breadbasket is empty, the very foundation of your economy crumbles. much like a poorly built pyramid. The societal impact was equally profound. As the economy faltered, social unrest brewed, and the once bustling marketplaces turned into ghost towns. The artisans, merchants, and laborers who had been the backbone of Egypt's trade prowess suddenly found themselves out of work, their skills as useful as a solar panel in a tomb. The vibrant middle class that had once driven innovation now struggled to survive, their dreams of prosperity as faded as the hieroglyphs on a forgotten temple wall. Now, let's debunk a myth. The Egyptians didn't just sit idly by as their trade networks crumbled. There were attempts to patch things up, like desperate DIY projects in the face of a crumbling home. Rulers like Sheshonq I, who reigned in the 10th century BCE, tried to rekindle the flame by launching military campaigns to recapture lost territories and re-establish trade routes. Picture him as a determined contractor trying to fix a leaky roof during a hurricane, valiant, but ultimately overwhelmed by the forces at play. The unraveling of Egypt's trade networks also highlights a crucial lesson in logistics. Over-reliance on a single resource is a recipe for disaster. Egypt's entire economy was built on the back of the Nile, and when it faltered, so did the nation. It's a bit like putting all your eggs in one basket, and then realizing the basket has a gaping hole. This overdependence meant that when environmental and political conditions shifted, Egypt had no backup plan, no diversified portfolio to fall back on. And oh, the irony doesn't stop there. The very innovations and exchanges that had propelled Egypt to its zenith ironically contributed to its decline. The spread of technology and ideas that had once been Egypt's strength now became its Achilles heel. Neighboring civilizations, having learned Egypt's secrets, began to outmaneuver them. Iron smelting, for example, was adopted by the Hittites and Assyrians, who used it to craft superior weapons, leaving Egypt's Bronze Age armies looking like relics in a museum. So here we are, at the end of Egypt's trading saga, a tale that began with the fertile banks of the Nile and ends in a quagmire of political infighting, economic missteps, and environmental challenges. It's a story that feels as relevant today as it did thousands of years ago. Because, in truth, the decline of Egypt's trade networks is a potent reminder of the interconnectedness of logistics, economics, politics, and society. A dance where one misstep can lead to a cascade of consequences. And as we gaze back at the grandeur of ancient Egypt, with its towering pyramids and intricate hieroglyphs, it's easy to get swept up in the romance of it all. But behind every obelisk and sarcophagus is the stark reality of a civilization that rose and fell on the tides of trade. It's a testament to human ingenuity and ambition, but also a cautionary tale of how even the most powerful empires can falter when they fail to adapt. So, as we wrap up our journey through the bustling markets and stormy seas of ancient Egypt, let's take a moment to ponder the lessons they've left behind. In a world that's more connected than ever, the story of Egypt's trade networks serves as both a mirror and a map, reflecting our own triumphs and challenges while guiding us toward a future where adaptability and innovation are more crucial than ever. Because, in the end, history isn't just a series of dates and events. It's a living narrative that continues to shape our world today.